Hello and welcome everybody into my latest live broadcast. Today is the 2nd of January 2020 and today we're going to finish up on the two BeQuiet builds that we're doing. The BeQuiet Pure Base 500 are the two cases that you see up here on the counter. And before I get started, I'm going to wait for some people to join us here in the chat. Since I'm getting a little bit of an early start, we'll make sure that the audio and video are going out correctly without any sync issues. Upload is looking good, although we've already had some drop frames, which is not a good sign. Still trying to figure out what's causing some interruptions in my live streaming. However, what I'm looking at here on the screen is still an improvement over what it was. I'm getting about 1.5% of drop frames right now. Hopefully that'll go down, but it's possible it'll go up. If we continue to have this problem, I'll have to the problem will exist outside of my house. Essentially, I'll have to bring out the cable company and have them check out the lines. But we'll just have to do this for about a week. If it can stay steady, even what it's doing now, if it'll do this, if this is as bad as it gets, it's livable. So we'll see how that goes. My thanks, a huge thanks goes out to John Jack Wilson. So he just contributed a very generous contribution to the channel to help support these videos and all the things I need to create them. So a huge thank you. What a great way to start out the year. So thank you to John. You probably see him in the chat room. Bill Leatherland joins us all the way from the UK. Welcome in, Bill. And well, there it goes. I just noticed the stream dropped completely there for a minute. So it does, that's what I thought. It was never in my house. The problem is somewhere outside. Somewhere beyond my home, because I just saw it dip just now. I saw my output rate fall to the ground. Well, again, I'm going to just keep pushing through it and keep an eye on it, and we'll just see what happens. It's still better than it was, but I don't know that that's just not coincidence. Anyway, yeah, so Bill Leatherland watching us from England. It looks like I was going to give you a shout out on your birthday, which was a few days ago. So happy belated birthday to Bill Leatherland, and be sure and tell Bill happy birthday if you see him there in the chat room. And I got my water today. I've had enough Coke. I'm feeling hyper. I'm gonna get some work done. Hello to all my other friends there in blue. Thank you for joining me. So what happened was when we built this is the Pure Base 500. This one has the glass, the tempered glass side panel on it. So we're putting lots of pretty colors in there and RGB for this build. And I struggled a little bit with this case because it's just not quite tall enough to put the cooler where I initially intended it for it to go. In hindsight though, the way we ended up having to mount it is actually better in my opinion, because it really shows off the LEDs and the fans. And I thought it was very interesting to watch the feedback on that video and the comments even in the live chat where people just weren't understanding the focus on this build was on the looks of it. It was on being able to see the RGB. And people were like, you know, that'll work better, it'll be more efficient, it'll run cooler if you put the fans on the other side. Well, if you put the fans on the other side, you're not going to see the RGB. You know, it would probably work better if I took the glass panel off and replaced it with a solid panel. I mean, why not? But then what's the point of spending all the extra money on the RGB? You won't be able to see it. So ultimately, this will show off the RGB much better. Silverstone, my thanks to Tony over at Silverstone, they sent me a replacement fan. This is one of the things I don't like about RGB. There's nothing wrong with this fan, but there's something wrong with the RGB that it was causing a flicker. And it's an unnecessary repair. Like if you didn't have RGB, since it has nothing to do with the performance of the computer, that would never be a problem you'd ever have to deal with. But be that as it may, the Silverstone immediately sent me another fan, and faster than Silverstone was BeQuiet, because I had dropped the motherboard modular cable onto the floor and it broke the little clip off of this side. And within 2 days, BeQuiet had sent me a brand new 24-pin power connector. They didn't have to do that. And a bunch of Go Faster stickers. So if I need any If I want this to go faster, I'll put these stickers on it and it'll make the machine go faster. But thanks over to email over at BeQuiet. These guys that, both Tony and email, Tony at Silverstone, email at BeQuiet, are fantastic, a pleasure to work with. And the parts that you're seeing in these videos are a direct result of them reaching out to me and offering. So it's like I didn't go to them and say, hey, give me some stuff. You know, they approached me and said, would you like to evaluate this? I was like, yes, I would. So as a result, that's where these two cases came from. I asked for the windowed version and the non-windowed version, and the reason I did that is there's two different philosophies basically when it comes to building computers. There's this I want it to look pretty philosophy, and there's this I just want it to work philosophy. So for offices, businesses, corporate environments, and serious individuals, we want to look at the windowless case. It's $10 cheaper, and you don't have to worry about cleaning any windows, right, besides what you installed on the computer. And then on the other side of that same coin, we've got the windowed version, which is really for people that care about the aesthetic. You know, they want their computer to run too, but they're willing to spend more money for something that has no impact on performance or reliability, and potentially endure some repairs that they normally wouldn't have to repair, or some configuration, like you can configure the lights to do whatever you want them to do, that the rest of us would rather, you know, other people, I should say, would rather earn money or use the computer to get things accomplished. Other people like to look at the computer as a kaleidoscope. I don't know. But be that as it may, money, I'm typically focused on giving my customers the best value for the dollar. And RGB is an excuse to crank up the prices on stuff to add profit because the profit margins are so slim. So if they being the manufacturers, can convince the consumer that something that has pretty colors on it has more value, that's in their best benefit. So of course, manufacturers want to make as much money as possible. In my experience, consumers want to spend the least amount of money as possible in most cases. But some people are very passionate about their RGB. So what I've done off camera is I replaced that lower fan, and the flickering has gone away. What I still have to do is replace the 24-pin motherboard power cable, but I thought we'd fire it up and get a nice look at what the RGB is going to look like on this now that everything's hooked up and working properly. So I'm going to start by plugging in the HDMI cable. Right here, we're using the built-in video. The customer this is going to doesn't need anything more powerful than that. They're not gaming with it. We've got the BeQuiet Straight Power 11 power supply. I have mixed feelings on this power supply. I think, and again, BeQuiet sent me the power supply to evaluate it. I don't like how they put the plugs on the back of the power supply vertically with the largest plug in front so that you can't see any of the plugs behind it, which is going to make upgrading and repairing take more time than it should take, in my opinion. If all the plugs were horizontal, one above the other, which is how they're typically done, even BeQuiet does it that way. For whatever reason, I don't know if they just did it to be different. It's not a good fit when you have a big shroud like this that doesn't come off. There are BeQuiet cases where the shroud comes off. This shroud is riveted in. I've checked it. There's rivets. It's not coming out. So to work on this, you know, you have to come at it from the back side. And that means if that plug is the first thing you see on the back side, all the other plugs that are behind it, they're smaller, so you can't see them. You have to start moving things. And it's dark and it's crowded in there because you've got the hard drive cage. The only other improvement I would suggest for this case, apart from having it be about 1.5 inches taller for liquid cooler placement, would be toolless 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch drive installation, similar to what the Corsair 200R offers, where it just locks into place with no drive rails, no accessories, no screws, and no tools. I understand this process. I understand why they do it. It's cheap, but I think it can be improved for just a very small increase in price. And when you're at a case at this level, this is about $110 case, I think. I can't remember what the price was on this. But we're already moving past, not putting in optical drives. You see the front of this case is completely flat. There's no way to put an optical drive or a USB card reader or anything like that in there. And we're also moving away from 3.5-inch and 2.5-inch drives. More and more, we're going with M.2 storage, as this computer has, and not even installing a traditional drive. So for this build, that's a non-issue at this point. But if the owner of this computer said, I need a lot more storage, I need 12 terabytes, they'd have to spend $480 on a hard drive, and it would have to use tools to secure that into the drive tray back here, which they can do. But most consumers that I deal with, they don't have 100 gigs of data on it. And so this owner is going to be just fine, I predict. So let's fire it up. Let me show you what it looks like. Let's get the camera zoomed in here, and we'll give you a real good look. Let's bring it down, bring the camera down right there. And then let's turn it this way a bit and hit the power button. Well, I probably have to hit the switch on the power supply back to on. And you'll see even the motherboard has RGB here and up here. Here we go. This system is dead quiet. Remember, there's going to be a big glass panel right here. James Zender has contributed $20. He says, I'm still hanging around. Hey, James, good to see you. So if we zoom this in a little bit more, you'll actually be able to see the RGB better. See if I can. The ambient light in the room is having an effect on the camera. Let's see if I can adjust the gain manually here, and you guys can really get a look at what that looks like. I like the way the colors change on the fans. I think that's really cool. And of course, the center of the water block is matching what the fans are doing. And then of course, the flow of the RGB on the RAM sticks there, the G-Skill Trident Z RAM. Let's darken this up more. So that's why we wanted to see those fans. We want to really have a nice look at the way those colors are flowing and changing. And that can all be adjusted. You can make that a solid color, you can make it blink, you can do all kinds of weird, happy stuff with it. If that's what you do with your computer, knock yourself out. So that is what the build looks like. And I've got to do cable management on it so that you won't really see much of the cables. Let's see if I can get this gain turned back up on the video. There we go. So anyway, I'm going to clean up this cabling. This will all be hidden. Nothing I can do about these two pipes. I've got to change the 24-pin connector, which I'm going to do now. I've got to wire tie that wire for the rear case fan, but all the fans are hooked up. The front fan we've taken off. That'll be an extra part that I'll just put in my parts box. Use that on a future repair or something. I did talk to the owner of the computer I repaired yesterday, and they mentioned that they had a hard drive they were using. That's why there was a fourth SATA cable that wasn't hooked up, and they said just take it out. They don't need it. And that computer's done, and it'll be shipped out back to the customer tomorrow. Once this computer has the cable management done, then that one will be ready to be delivered. This has Windows 10 on it already. I've already run all of the benchmarks on it. So if you look at my video library for the RGB, the really great build, that's this build. It has all the parts listed in there. This is the ASRock Z390 Phantom Gaming 7 motherboard that we used in this build. Overall, I'm a little disappointed that board doesn't have more BIOS updates. There was only one update to it. I think there's only 2 BIOS versions that were ever released. That scares me because I see other boards that came out about the same time have 5 or 6. So does that mean they got it right and they didn't have as much to fix? Or does that mean they just didn't sell enough of those boards to put too much money into the continual development of the BIOS unless it's absolutely critical? I don't know. But it's running well. It's good. It's just something I'm a little weary of. The other repair that, if you've been watching the channel, Martin came back with his computer I built about 5 years ago, just under 5 years ago, and his power supply failed, Corsair power supply. I was able to get the RMA number from Corsair. They required a picture of the top of the power supply that has the serial number and lot number, and they wanted a copy of the receipt to show that it was still within its 5-year warranty. They issued the RMA, they received the power supply, the bad one, and they've sent me a tracking number the other day for UPS. So I should see that by the beginning of next week, and I can get that power supply put back in and button up Martin's computer, and that'll be ready to go back to him. So we're moving through stuff today. Once I get the power supply motherboard power cable replaced on this one, I'm going to set this aside because, like I said, it needs cable management. I will do that off camera. And we'll go over to this machine over here where I did the motherboard prep, and I'm going to install it into the BeQuiet. It's the same case, the PureBase 500, but it's windowless, and I think it's going to fit in there beautifully, and there really won't be any recommendations for improvement on the case because, again, I'm not using a 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drive, so that's irrelevant whether or not it's toolless. And I'm not putting in a liquid cooler, so that's irrelevant as to whether or not it fits in there well. So if you're building a machine where you're not installing a 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch, or you don't mind having to turn screws to get those installed, and you're not using a liquid cooler, the PureBase 500 is very well built. It's reasonably priced. You're right around $100. There's a $10 difference between the windowed version and the windowless. And yeah, I suppose if I couldn't get the 200R case anymore from Corsair, the windowless version of the PureBase 500 would make a good business computer because it's small and it's fairly lightweight and it's very well built. These things typically sit on the floor and people roll their chairs in and out of their desk, and the chairs hit the face of the computer or the side, their feet, their shoes. So the computer, I don't want something cheap and flimsy that's going to dent. And these are definitely not going to dent, not unless you really intend it, So just accidental stuff might scratch it up, but that's par for the course in a corporate office or a business, that has employees anyway. So I think I missed a contribution in here. Let me give a quick shout out to, I missed a few. Sorry, guys. Jesse Kirk contributed $10. Hey, thank you, Jesse. Hugh Wong has contributed $2. He says, good afternoon, Carey. I saw you on Newegg. Yeah, I was doing Newegg videos a couple of years ago, videos for Newegg. Tony Wallow. Hey, Tony, he's contributed $1.99. Thank you so much, Tony. Thanks, you guys, for supporting the channel. Okay, so this machine here, if I flip over to camera 2, which is the video output of that computer, we can see it's at the desktop. And for those of you who didn't watch the build video, I guess I didn't plug the keyboard and mouse in. Hold on, let me plug in a keyboard and mouse into this bad boy here. And now we can go over to this properties and we can take a look at the specs of this machine, which is no slouch. If you look, you can see we have 32 gigs of RAM on a Core i9 9900, which is very close to one of the fastest processors available today in the Socket 1151 arena. With the latest chipset, the Z390, and there's plenty of room for upgradability in this machine as well. So overall, the jury is still out with regards to reliability on this motherboard. I don't know. Time will tell. But other ASRock and MSI boards I've used have been imperceptibly different from Asus and Gigabyte. So I think those are your 4 main manufacturers for motherboards. Asus, Gigabyte, ASRock, and MSI, not necessarily in that order, although maybe. And I think you're fine buying from any of them. When I'm buying dozens or hundreds of motherboards, I tend to stay with one manufacturer that I know has a good support structure in place. It doesn't necessarily mean that other manufacturers are bad. It just means I don't want to go out of business because I can't reach them or they don't respond in a timely manner. And I had some bad experience in the past with regards to that on an ASRock, on 3 ASRock boards that basically caught fire, and ASRock said it was my fault, even though all 3 systems were owned by 3 different customers. They had 3 different power supply manufacturers and models, So we know it wasn't a bad power supply, and the boards failed in the same exact spot. So I took pictures of the boards. I held on to them for a while in case of a class action lawsuit, but I ended up taking pictures of the boards and then recycling. They just take up too much space. And I had to buy those customers, all 3 customers, I had to buy them new motherboards out of my own money. And as you can imagine, didn't have a very good taste in my mouth for ASRock. Now, in all fairness, that was probably about 10 years ago. So I've decided to revisit them in the hopes that the company structure has changed. And so I'm entering into that pool very slowly, sticking a toe in the water, if you will, with ASRock and MSI. I don't expect the first couple I use to have any issues, but the more you use, you know, eventually you're going to come into a problem. That's the way it is with all manufacturers. And it's not really a question of if, it's a question of when. And then it becomes, well, are they going to take care of me next time, or are they going to tell me it's my own fault and then not honor their warranty? Hopefully I won't have to find that out anytime soon. But anyway, so that's the build. I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. So we'll close that out. And we can put back on, if I can find my mouse, we'll put camera 1 back on. There we are. Okay. So this is going to be fast, reliable, and it's going to look pretty. It requires a bit of extra cable management, again, because of the RGB. You know, look at the cables on this fan. Normally, you'd only have 1 cable, right? You'd normally have, let me get rid of that one. Normally, you just have this 1 cable on most fans, and the cable's typically not this long. On this one, you also have the RGB cable, and it's got an RGB output. So you string it up like old-time Christmas lights. Plug one end into the motherboard's RGB header, and then you would plug the pump and the other fan into each other so that they all, just like Christmas lights, they're all daisy-chained together. And you can just keep that going, you know. So they give you one and they take one. So that adds more cabling here, more cabling because there's 2 fans instead of 1. And that's all going to have to get wire tied. But it does appear that we have lots and lots of room for cable management on the back of this case. So if I spin this around, I will show you. There's a good amount of clearance for cabling, at least more than a half an inch of space, so that these cables can all sit flush, and we shouldn't have any problem putting this back panel on. It certainly seems to have more space than the Corsair 200R does. Also, you could just grab these cables instead of neatly folding them and nylon zip tying them. You could just jam them all in this hole, because equally nobody's going to see them. Although I will say, when you do the nylon zip ties, it does make it easier to work on the machine so you don't have all these tangles getting in your way. But if you were really lazy but you still wanted it to look good, when you buy a machine that's got that shroud in the front, that's really good at hiding all the cables. Nobody's ever going to see the big rat's nest you shove in there. So something to keep in mind, something the Corsair 200R doesn't offer as well. Ed Schwartz has contributed $20.20, apparently for 2020. Right on. He says, Happy New Year. Enjoy your build and repair videos. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoy them. I appreciate that very much. And thanks for your contribution and for supporting the channel. I have been really, really trying hard to avoid sponsorship, and it's getting tough because the expenses keep going up the more ambitious I get. And then I think of the potential, you know, if I had a big chunk of money all at once, what I could do with it, you know, for the channel. Studio, lighting, all this other stuff. Hire a camera person. So I realize, and by doing it the way I'm doing it, the channel's not growing as quickly, but at the same time, I enjoy the interaction I have with you guys. And I also like that I'm not out here shilling products because I'm paid. If I'm shilling a product, it's because I truly think it's a really good product. So just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind, and it's those contributions, like what we're seeing here in the super chat, that help keep that moving forward at any speed. So I want to change out this motherboard power cable real quick, super easy. Take this one out of this side, bring that for here, And because this is the very first cable, well, the first two on this power supply, see how I got to get around all this tangle of mess? This is what I'm complaining about when it comes to RGB. It's just more crap. But it does look pretty. I'll give you, it looks pretty. And for some people, that's all that matters. So this is the one that broke, this side of it. And it broke because I dropped it on the floor, although that's not BeQuiet's fault. It is kind of weird to me that a 3-foot drop broke the clip. But regardless, they being BeQuiet, sent me another cable, and they sent it quickly. So you can see where the clip broke off on this side here. So anyway, done with that. And here's our replacement, and that's going to go if I can get all these cables out of my way and I can see. You can understand why I'm complaining about the access to the back of this power supply. It's very tight, it's dark, and you must put the cables in on a certain order. You have to work your way from the back to the front. You really got to think ahead. Otherwise, you'll end up having to take cables back out if you need to get behind them. With this case and this power supply combined. This power supply may be better in a different case without the shroud, or with a removable shroud. But that's still, if it's a removable shroud, more work you're going to have to do that you wouldn't have to do potentially with other power supply designs. But as for the power output and the quality of it, I'm sure that's fantastic. But yeah, this is more difficult than it really should be. In fact, I'm going to have to take this hard drive cage out to get to it. It's just too tight in there for me to get my hands in there, and I don't even have big hands, so I don't know how like a normal sized human being is supposed to do that. See, Irving T just contributed €2. Irving, thank you so much for your support throughout last year and now starting into this year. Irving, I know, watches us in France. Okay, what do I do with the cable? Oh, here it is. All right, let me try this one more time. And I still need a flashlight. You know, in a build like this, it almost is a waste of money to go to a modular power supply because people aren't going to see your cables anyway. You would just take all the extra cables on your power supply and bundle them down in here. Nobody's ever going to see them. You don't have to worry about losing them. So definitely, with the shroud that doesn't come off, you should consider a non-modular power supply. A non-modular power supply is a power supply that has all the cables built into it. Modular is we only add the cables we need. That reduces the number of cables in the computer. That makes the computer look prettier. But if you're just going to shove all the extras down in here where they can't be seen anyway, it's a non-issue. So why spend extra for a modular power supply, which, you know, if this was a non-modular power supply, there would be no clips on this side. So there would have been nothing to break. You know, the whole power supply would have had to have fallen on the floor, and that probably would have damaged my floor before it damaged any clips on the wires, probably. So overall, in a different case, this power supply may be great. You know, the design of it may not be an issue, but in the Pure Base 500, it's not a good fit together, unfortunately. But how else do we know, right? So that's why I do these build videos, and I show you, because you can evaluate a case, but there may be things about it you don't realize until you start working on it. And so we ran into the issue, again, with the clip breaking off. We ran into the issue with the bad LED on the RGB fan. We ran into the issue, which had nothing to do with the case, and we ran into the issue of not being able to put the radiator for the liquid cooler up on top, which is traditionally where it would go. In most scenarios, that's where you place it, unless you have a real specialty case or a real specialty cooler. Now, as I mentioned, it turns out the cooler actually looks much, much better up on the front. Its performance is astonishing. I can't believe how cold the CPU is running. In fact, I find it so hard to believe. I asked Silverstone to send me another exact same cooler so I can use it on another build in a different case with a different CPU and see if it cools just as well. Oh, on a different motherboard that, perhaps might report the temperatures differently, may have temperature sensors with different sensitivities or in different locations, depending on how the motherboard manufacturer does it. And I also want to make a how-to install video because I found Silverstone's instructions on the PF240 liquid cooler to be open to interpretation in too many points because I screwed up the install every possible way through misinterpreting the directions. So I will make a how-to video. It shows step by step exactly how to install it into a socket 1151 Intel board and explain, the back plate, which side is forward, which side is backward, which side is sideways, what's up and down, what's the proper procedure, along with those little washers they call standoffs and along with the standoffs that they call spacers. I'm going to clean up all that language and do it my way. And then hopefully people that buy this cooler, the PF240, won't struggle with the install the way that I did. So I hope to make it very, very clear while at the same time testing it to see that it is consistently running CPUs as cool as it is because I've never seen a cooler run like a standard all-in-one cooler of a 240 size. I've never seen one run a chip as cold as this is running. So I'm kind of freaking out. I'm skeptical. I'm not freaking out. I'm like, is this really true? So with the other one, I'll be able to verify if it's consistent or if it's just the way that this motherboard reports or something unique about the configuration, or maybe this pump is hyperactive and it's extra. I don't know. But we're going to find that out soon. That's coming up. Well, let me put the drive tray back since we're done with that now. So this is what I'm talking about. This is your 3.5-inch hard drive tray cage. And you can put two 3.5-inch hard drives in here, but you've got to also put screws in there. On a 200R case from Corsair, you just slide the drive in and there's a little catch and it clicks, it goes into the screw mounting hole on the side of the hard drive. You're done. You're one and done. And you can optionally secure it in the Corsair. Like if you're going to ship the computer and you want to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. You don't have to. This one, you don't have a choice. You have to put screws in it. And that means you're going to have to take this cage out to put your drives in. You cannot do it inside because you won't be able to get to one side or the other to secure it. And you're definitely going to want to put at least one screw on each side to secure that. And ideally, you'll put two screws on each side. So I don't like that design. On the plus side, if I look at the benefit of it, at least they didn't require any rails or trays. I hate that because customers lose them or they break. They get dry and brittle because they're plastic and they break. And then what do? You get out your duct tape, that's sloppy. So again, we're not installing any 3.5-inch drives on this build, and very rarely am I installing them these days. It's typically for more of a power user who's got a lot of data. Most customers, like I said, they're under 100 gigs of data. Like I'm imaging systems I work on all the time, and the customers usually have under 100 gigs of data. And again, when it comes to the 2.5-inch drives, they can mount here and here, as well as here and here. So there's room for 4 of those. But you're going to add a lot of cabling to that, right? I guess they'll mount on the other side. But you need data and a power cable to each drive. So if you have a drive here and a drive here, there's 4 cables. If you have 2 more there, there's 4 more cables. There's a total of 8. And then things are going to get real crowded and difficult back here when you do that. So with M.2, being able to just put a little, what appears to be a stick of gum right into a circuit board on the motherboard, right into a socket. It's a nice clean installation. We have no cabling to deal with, and it runs 5 times faster, at least on the NVMe side of things. So let me fire it up one more time, make sure I put that cable on correctly. Switch is off. Keyboard and mouse I've left plugged in. I need the HDMI cable. And let's take a look at what the boot up time is on this. It's pretty darn quick. let's go here. Now I'm going to go ahead and flip you over now to camera 2, which will say no signal. Perfect. Now here we go. 3, hold on, I'm going to turn the power supply back on. I'll count down and I will hit the power button so we can start our timers to see how long it takes to boot to the Windows desktop. 3, 2, 1, on. Oh my God. If that didn't impress you, I don't know what. I don't know what to do. You're a difficult person to impress. If you did not find that impressive, I don't know what to tell you. That even impressed me. I knew it was going to be quick, but I didn't think it was going to be that quick. Holy smokes. What a great combination of parts we've got in here. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty good. If you blinked, you may have missed it. And then there's the storage on our C drive there. Perfect. So we'll go ahead and shut it back down. Perfect. We'll go back to camera 1. There I am. So I'm going to flip this back off and unplug everything. And then I'm going to set this aside so we can put this motherboard into the windowless version of this case. Getting things done today. Watch out. That's the keyboard and mouse dongle. Put that aside. Get it out of our way. And now I'll just pick this up and move it over here. So I'll do that cable management a bit later. And then I can put the side panels on it, and I'll do like a final video of the machine all assembled, all completed, and that'll be tacked on to the end of the series of build videos I did with that. That's the really great build, the RGB really great build series you'll see on my channel. It's a few videos back. And I think there's 3 parts to it. So this will be like a 4th part, and then a small sort of, here it is completed, you know, on the, like a model on the turntable. And that'll be like a little 5th part, just a couple minutes. And that'll be, actually that 5th part, you guys won't see it. My sister will get it, she'll edit it all together, stitch it all together. So it'll be, without all the chit chat in it, you know, it'll just be the build all pieced together. And let's take a look if I missed any contributions. Oh, I missed a few. George has contributed 25 Romanian, whatever they're called. Thank you. It says, why don't you plug all the cables in first and then put the power supply in the case? That's all well and good if you know ahead of time, you know, if you think ahead. Normally when I build, I will plug in cables as I need them. Because when you plug all the cables in the power supply, and then you put the power supply in, it's like dealing with all the spaghetti. Cables get trapped underneath, they get pinched into the corners, and you need to use both hands to sort of feed it through with all the cables. And sometimes I don't realize I need a cable until I go to hook up, like I'll forget there's a DVD drive. I forgot I need to add a SATA power connector to that. Now I got to take all these cables back off. And then of course, even if you did that, even if you did it perfectly, you thought ahead, I don't normally have to do that, plug in all the cables, but then the customer wants to change something in 2 months or next year. So I'm back to having to pull all these cables to have access to it. That bothers me because my thing is being all about time, getting in and out as quickly as possible. The longer I'm there, the more the customer pays. So the customer's going, you said this would take you less than an hour, why is it taking you so long? So things like that. When you're working at home, it's not an issue for you. When you've got, let's say, an office and you have 1,000 of those computers, and all 1,000 require an upgrade, as corporations tend to do, that upgrade goes from what could be a 10-minute upgrade to upwards of a half an hour upgrade because of all the extra work you have to do. And for what reason? In other words, what justifies the extra effort? What are you getting in return for that you're not getting from another power supply? And so far as I can tell, nothing. It's just not well thought out. At least not in that case. Likewise, if you had a non-modular power supply in a case that was glass windows all the way around it, that wouldn't be ideal for that case for the sake of aesthetics. But that's a complete different concern than when we're talking about billable time and making something that should be simple take longer and doing it for no apparent reason. Like I don't see any benefit to having those connectors vertical. I don't know who that's for or why that was done other than to be different. That's the only conclusion I can come to. So they just wanted to offer something that nobody else was doing. But sometimes the reason nobody else does it is a good reason. It wasn't that they didn't think of it. It was that it doesn't make any sense for us to do it that way. If there is a reason that I haven't considered, I'd certainly love to hear it. But the only thing I can conclude is they just wanted to be different. And so that makes everything more difficult with no benefit, as far as I can tell. Is that an NVMe SSD? Yeah, that's an Intel 660p. I use those a lot. You get 2 terabytes for around $200. And they run about 2,000, 1,800 megabytes, megabytes a second. So it's not the fastest NVMe, but it's still 4 times faster than a regular SATA solid state drive. And it's half the price of a Samsung 970 EVO Plus, which for 2 terabytes costs $400. On the Intel side, 2 terabytes is around $200. So it's a little more than half the speed at half the price. And I find most people don't notice it other than in benchmarks. Like your Microsoft Word isn't really going to notice, you're not going to notice it opening any faster. Your boot time, once you hit a certain speed, your return is milliseconds. So unless you're doing intense amount of hard disk writing or solid state drive writing, you're unlikely to notice a speed difference between 2,200 megabytes a second and 10,000 megabytes a second, quite frankly. In normal, ordinary use, it's imperceptible to the end user because the diminishing returns of the added performance really just shows benchmarks to drool over, but the reality of using the computer doesn't really feel any different. I've run my own experiments on that just to verify it, and yeah, they can't tell. The end users can't tell. I can even pull them out of a normal SATA 550 megabyte per second drive and put them into a 3,500 megabyte per second drive. They don't notice it. The system still boots quick. Word still loads the same. Quicken still loads the same. Excel still loads the same. The network's not any faster and the internet's not any faster. But not everybody uses their computer like that. But I think most people do. Most people do. So, we tend to get, or I tend to get, some extremists here on the channel, some extreme enthusiasts who perhaps don't use their computers in the way that the average person does. But then I wouldn't need to explain to you the difference. You would already know that, and you would already know if you benefit from that. For most people who don't know, they never will. It's a waste of money for them. And I'm always looking out after, saving my customers money. I don't want to sell my customer something they don't need. So here's the windowless version of the PureBase 500. This is the same case without the tempered glass window. And I think this is going to make a great business computer. And I'll explain what makes it a good business computer. One of the first things that I require, that my customers require, is a flat top. I have yet to go to a customer's office where they don't have stuff sitting on top of the computer. So like NZXT had these cases and they had kind of pointy or angled tops, and it really upset pretty much everybody I sold one to. So think I only sold 2 or 3 of those as a result. Some manufacturers put the power button and USB stuff down here, which makes it very, very difficult to reach if you're sitting in a chair at a desk, and this is sitting on the floor, which is typically where it is. It's also got really nice clearance under here because they are typically sitting on a floor. Your power supply sitting down here is bringing in air from down here. So like on the 200R case that you normally see me use, I don't have anywhere near this much clearance. So it's real easy for this power supply in here to become a vacuum cleaner or to suffocate itself if it's not placed somewhere on a flat surface versus thick carpeting, like thick carpeting could block it on the 200R. And in which case it's an easy problem to solve. You just put something under it to lift it up. With this case, you don't have to do that. It's got more clearance, which is a good thing. It's also got the full 7 PCI expansion ports, so you can put a micro ATX or full ATX motherboard in here. And some customers have a lot of add-in cards or things where they need these. And so smaller cases or more limited cases or even inverted cases can limit what can go into it. Also, it's plain black. It's not showy, it's not gaudy, and it's timeless as a result. So they can have this case for, over a decade and just keep changing the internals to make it modern. And you don't run into the political drama that happens in offices where, let's say we give somebody a computer with RGB and then somebody gets one without it. Well, how come they got the RGB and I didn't? How come their computer's nicer than mine? So as long as everybody's got the same black box, they don't know what's inside, that becomes a non-issue at the office. And believe me, it can be a real problem when somebody feels like somebody else has something better than they do. And how come they don't get it? What makes me less deserving? So we want everybody to have the same. And it's not really that important that the internals are the same. It's important that the employees don't know to avoid that scenario. The other reason we want it the same is because we want to make support easier. And so if we've got some AMD systems and some Intel systems and some with this case and some with that case and some with this motherboard and some with that motherboard, now suddenly support gets more complicated because when there's a problem, the next thing we have to determine is which configuration is it. And then when we do maintenance, we have to worry about maintaining different drivers for different hardware, and that becomes more time consuming. Time equals money. It means they're going to be down longer. It means they're going to pay more. Well, that maintenance work is being done because it's taking longer. So in an office, you really want everything to be the same. You want it as plain as possible. You don't want somebody to go, I think I want to steal that and take it home, which, if you have something really flashy and blingy, it's more likely somebody's going to want to take it. When it's sort of black and boring, it's a cube, whatever, it's just another computer to the average employee. They can't tell them apart, and that's exactly what we're looking for. Now, in a previous video, just about 2 weeks ago, I think, I prepped this motherboard with, I believe, a 9700K, the Mugen 5 cooler, and I think that's 32 gigs of Corsair Vengeance RAM. That's all put on a Gigabyte H370 HD3 motherboard. Now, if I were going to build a machine for me, the H370 HD3 board is the one I'm recommending right now today. If you don't require any RGB and you want something that's going to be, it's likely going to work when you put it together. So let's say you don't have a lot of experience putting a computer together, maybe you've never done it before. If you pick the right parts, your job will be super easy. A lot of people, for example, when I built this, were telling me that the i9 processor would not work on a socket on a H370 board. With the latest BIOS, this does support, as we've already turned it on and I've shown you, and this is the second time or the third time I've done it. The reason I like this board so much is it's $99 on Amazon, and it'll support 2 graphics cards. Why you'd want to do that, I don't know. At least 2 Crossfire ones. We've got enough expansion slots for adding things like Wi-Fi cards or anything you want to add. It's got 2 M.2 ports, it's got 6 SATA ports, It's got has it got two USB 3s or just one? Okay, it's just got the one USB 3 header, which is fine. That's all we need. Sometimes there's another one down here, but not on this board. And it's basically all business. That's what I like about it. It's nothing extra, nothing frivolous. There's no plastic I/O cover that gets in the way. It makes it difficult to install. There's no built-in I/O shield, which kind of sucks. Having to put the I/O shield in is like, for many first-time builders, is a struggle. And you got to be careful when you put it in that you don't bend the little grounding straps down. So, one improvement would be that the I/O shield would be built onto it, but it's a minor little thing. It doesn't have a lot of fanciness to it. It's just sort of a good, solid, reliable, and very competitively priced motherboard to get the job done. And you can put pretty much any i3, i5, i7, and i9 processor in there. And if it's socket 1151, it should work as far as I know. I know some of the i9s are a different socket, right? Or they have the X on them. But regardless of that, you probably wouldn't be spending that kind of money. It wouldn't make sense, to not put that under a more expensive board. Some people have complained that, a K processor in a non-Z chipset doesn't make sense, but those people are simple-minded and they don't understand that a K processor is 10% faster than the non-K. So if you have an i9 9900 and you compare it to an i9 9900K from Intel, you'll see there's a price difference and a speed difference without overclocking it. It's 10% faster out of the box. Now, when those K processors go on sale, as they frequently do, they're often $5 or less more than the non-K. My question to you is, would you pay $5 more to go 10% faster, no overclock needed? If you're already dropping $1,000 or $1,100 on your build, would you drop an extra $5 to go 10% faster? Suddenly, that makes sense. You don't have to buy a motherboard that's $170 that has the Z chipset on it with a bunch of bells, whistles, and features that you have no intention of using. That is what I would suggest is a foolish move. You do not have to pair a K processor with a Z motherboard. It's absolutely false. Now, this is a problem on the internet where people think everybody thinks like they do, which is amusing to me. It's like, how can you be oblivious of other people's differences in expectations and budgets? The old expression, one person's trash is another person's treasure. For as much as people will drool over the RGB builds, there are equally people that go, that's just a complete waste of money and it makes me want to throw up. So we're building for the individual. Sometimes I think when I make these videos, the people watching them think that I'm building it for them, or I'm talking specifically to you. I am not talking to you specifically. I'm talking to 932 people right now. And of course, after this video is processed on YouTube, after it's live, another 10,000 views it'll have. So I'm sort of flattered that I'm making a connection with people that they forget that they're in a crowd. That's kind of flattering to me that we're making that connection. But at the same time, it's a little off-putting to me because I'm looking at a huge crowd of people, and when you're looking back and you only see me, it may give you a false understanding that I'm not talking directly to you. And so I don't know you, and I don't know your budget, and I don't know your needs, and I don't know your experience, and I don't know if you're a gamer or you're a businessman. I don't know if you're 12 years old or you're 80. I have no idea who you are. So what I'm trying to do is share the information equally amongst all of you in the hopes that you can process that information and adapt it to your needs. It's not for me to tell you what your needs are. As I said, I don't know. All I want to do is provide the information so that you can choose what's best for you. Please don't choose what's best for somebody else. It's really disrespectful. Unless they're paying you to do it, or you really want to spend time with that person. Like, we have a moderator in blue here. Her name is Catherine Anna Hauserman. And you can reach out to Catherine here in the chat when she's in there. I don't know if she's in there today. Or on Facebook at any time, if you're looking to have a parts list put together, Catherine doesn't go, here's a part list. She asks you a bunch of questions. What's your budget? What country do you live in? You know, what parts are available in that country? She's going to look that up. Which parts fit together? Which parts don't fit together? She's going to put all that together. How much money do you want to spend? And in your currency, she'll figure that out and put the list together. That's easily a $100 job. All that research and all that time that she's investing, and she does it for free. Most people on the internet, when they give you a parts list, they're giving you their parts list. They're telling you what they prioritize. Maybe they need a lot of RAM. Maybe you don't. Maybe they need a lot of storage. Maybe you don't. Maybe they need a case that's this big. Maybe you don't. And if they don't ask you these questions, then they're not really offering you any advice for you. They're telling you what they built for themselves. And if they don't tell you why, that information doesn't really help you very much. So my goal here is to explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing it so that you can process that information and then adapt it accordingly to your needs, your budget. That's it. It's not to say this is the only way, and it's not to say that what you want isn't important. It's that these builds people have paid me for. So they are the ones that are the focus of meeting the needs of. And I'm just turning the camera on and sharing that experience with you. So it seems like I have to explain it because I'm getting a feeling a lot of people don't get it. But that's what we're doing here. It's not just a sponsor sends me parts and says, here, make a video with this. If I can foresee putting a computer together from parts sent to me, like in the case of the BeQuiet Pure Base 500s, these were sent, the power supply was sent, and the PF240 cooler was sent, then I'm like, okay, I can put this together in a build. We can really use it, and we can furthermore follow up over time for a much better quality review, because having a product for a week and then saying you should buy it or shouldn't buy it, I think it's very short-sighted. The question is, how does that product hold up over time? And furthermore, if there becomes a problem with the product, to follow up and say what the experience was like with customer support. So you can buy cheaper stuff, but with cheaper stuff, you often don't get good support, if any. So like, it was really important when I started this video to tell you how quickly BeQuiet sent me that power supply cable. I didn't even ask for it. They saw the video, they sent it to me. I had it in 2 days after that video was made. Silverstone, I reached out to them. The gentleman was in another country. I think he was in India at the time. He said, when I get back to the office, I'll have them send you out another cooler and fan. Done. So Corsair is the same. When we sent the power supply in for Martin, Corsair has consistently been good with, you know, if I had a bad front panel connector on a case, they sent me 2 or 3 of those over the course of the few years. If I had a couple of bad power supplies, they replace them, no issues. I had some bad RAM, they replace it. It's super easy and very cooperative, and the process doesn't leave you hanging like, you know, where's the response to my emails? Anybody working there? Or they give you excuses on why they're not going to honor the warranty. That's what some companies do. And I avoid those companies like the plague, because I am then giving these computers the customers. The customers don't know who Asus is. They don't know who Corsair is. All they know is they got a computer from Carey, and that computer had problems, and it took Carey forever to fix it. Probably not going to buy another computer from Carey again. So it's really critical to me that the parts I recommend have good support. All products fail. You know, there's always going to be a problem. At some point, you're going to deal with a problem. That's not the issue. The issue is, when you have the problem, do they take care of you expediently? And Corsair has done that for me. Clearly, we had a good experience with BeQuiet here. Good experience with Silverstone on that. And EVGA is another company with great support. And so I will pay a little bit more for the parts. It's not a lot more. It's a little bit more, because I don't want to gamble my business away for a little extra profit. I would rather make a little less profit over a long span, a long career, over 30 years so far, or we're getting on 30 years, versus making a huge profit and then I have to go find another career because I have burned every bridge and taken advantage of people, and now I better go hide and find a completely different career. I can't do that. I don't have any other skill. So anyway, I realize people are hungry and they need to eat, but you're going to need to eat tomorrow too. It's not just a matter of grab it all right now. Think about, you know, the future. Think about how am I going to earn money tomorrow. If I take care of these people and I do everything right by them and they choose not to come back, there's nothing I can do about that. But that's not on me. You know what I mean? I did my part. And that's worked out really well for me. A computer repair business that's been around as long as mine has, there aren't many. Most of them fold up within the first 5 years. Regardless of size. There used to be a really large computer repair company called Microage. Huge. Hundreds, if not thousands of employees. Where are they today? Gone. Every company I've ever worked for is gone. Infinisys, Entex, Microage, Vanstar, they're all gone. They are all gone. They've either been purchased and bought out by another company and absorbed, or they filed bankruptcy and vanished. Same is true with the computer manufacturers. I worked for Naga Systems, they're gone. TriStar Computer, they're gone. I'm sure there may be computer manufacturers with the same names, but they're not related. So again, being in a field that's always evolving and changing, and dealing with human beings who don't like change, usually ends up resulting in a company that goes out of business. So I'm very, very proud of being in business for nearly 3 decades with no sign of stopping anytime soon. So that is my feedback, my reality to continue doing what I've been doing because it's working. So again, not telling you how to do it, just sharing with you my perspective. So you see when we take these panels off, the screws are captured. They don't come out. I mean, you could force them out, but you don't have to worry about losing them. You'll see there's a foam pad here. That's why the company's called BeQuiet. Their emphasis is on making cases that are more soundproof than a standard case. That being said, this build, when we turn it on, is silent anyway, and you will probably have greater heat because of this. However, nothing that should be a problem. Might run a couple degrees hotter, but well within the specification. If you were an overclocker, noise isn't your concern. I'll put it to you that way, because to silence the noise, you've got to put in insulation. When you put in insulation, you're insulating it, and you don't want to insulate something that you're trying to keep cool. What do we have here? Oh, we've got the screen, the magnetic screen. So the top is magnetic, and we can put a screen up there if we're going to put a, some fans. The filters are only for air that you're taking in, intake air. If the fans are blowing out, you don't put a screen on it. All it's going to do is restrict your airflow. That, again, would not be ideal. So we will not be using this screen on this build. So that will go, we'll just put it over there for now. And we don't even need this up there if we don't want it, but it does keep the top flat. And so the end user can remove that if they want to. That's pretty obvious. Down in the hard drive cage down below, there's a box, and it contains all of the screws for everything this case could potentially hold. So if this case can hold 4 2.5-inch drives, then it'll have 4, 8, 12, 16 little screws for that. We're not using any of those, so those will all be extra when we're done. But the case manufacturer doesn't know if you're going to max this thing out or if you're going to barely use it. So all the screws that you need to build your computer come with whatever case you have. None of the components other than the power supply will include screws, apart from a few odd like USB add-in cards, maybe have screws. But overall, you want to rely on the parts that come with the case. And it's really important after you build your computer that you keep all the extra parts, because sooner or later you're going to need to change something, upgrade something, and you're going to go, where did I put those screws? And you're going to try and find some screws that'll fit, and you're going to have nothing to base it off of. And it's not like you're going to go to the hardware store and find them. You'd have to shop online and get them somewhere. And what should be a 10-minute upgrade is now going to take you a week. We should wait for parts. So anyway, and of course you could always go back to the case manufacturer, which would be the best thing to do, and say, I need some screws, send them to me. So if you put away all your extra parts and put them where you can find them in the future, you can avoid that frustration and added expense. Hey everybody, we got 1,000 people watching live. Let me know where you're watching me from. Where are you in the world? Give a shout out in the chat room. Tell me where you're watching me from. And then this stuff here that comes with it, you can just put that over there. When you buy a quality case, quality cases will come with nylon zip ties. Nowhere near as many as you need, but the fact that they give you any at all is your first sign that you've bought a pretty decent case. When you're looking at price and all you're looking at is price, and you're paying less, you are going to get less. So all those little extras, all the little, like all these edges are all rolled, so I'm not going to cut my hands when I reach in there. Man, I worked on some cheap cases in the 90s that'll slice you open like a surgeon's knife. I always said, you know, the best tool a technician can have is a package of Band-Aids. But you're not going to need them on a BeQuiet case or even on the Corsair cases. Any of the name brand stuff is just built to a higher standard. So if you're looking to reach the bottom of the barrel, you can race to the bottom without me. I started at the bottom. I'm working my way up. If you're up here and you're going to the bottom, I'll wave at you as we pass by each other. I might come off a little bit of a snob about that, but it's because I suffered with so many unnecessary repairs, so much inconvenience, and so much time was lost over the desire to save $1 or $10, whatever it was insignificant. My first taste of this was buying a new car. And I'll just share this philosophy with you. The new car was going to be $250 a month for 48 months. That's pretty cheap for a brand new car. It was a Chevy S10 pickup truck, manual, air conditioning, but nothing else. Everything was, you know, it was a manual transmission. It was pretty much bone stock. I don't even think it had electric locks. I don't know. I can't remember. But I had a car. I never made a car payment before. But the car kept breaking down, breaking down, breaking down. I had to keep going to the auto parts store, buy a new alternator, buy a new belt, buy a new this, buy a new that. I don't have a tool for that. I got to buy the tool to do this thing that broke because I don't have the tool for that. Now I'll have the tool, so when it breaks again, I'll be ready. And then you start with one tool and you end up with 100 tools over the course of ownership of this used cheap car. And the first day I had my new car, well, first of all, when I'm signing the contract, I'm thinking, am I going to be able to come up with $250 a month over and above all my other expenses? As a kid, right? I didn't have many expenses. It was scary. That's a lot of money. So, if you're making $1,000 a month and you're going to put, I think I was making $1,200 a month, and you're going to put 250 of that once a month for 48 months, and the insurance goes up too. Anyway, what I found out was I took a huge weight off my shoulders I didn't even know was there. Because I used to go out to my car and wonder if it was going to start. I just had this, is it going to start today? Because it always broke down. It was always unreliable. I used to keep a jack and tools in my car because it broke down anywhere at any time and I wanted to be able to fix it no matter where I was. You know how much stress that is? I didn't realize it. So now I have a brand new car. Nobody's ever had it before. Smells good. You get in there, you turn the key, vroom, and starts right up. Gas mileage is awesome. The paint is beautiful. The interior's not torn. The dash isn't cracked. Everything's brand new. It's never been owned, and it's mine. It never, ever needed a repair. Never. It was brand new. And if it needed anything, it was under warranty. You take it to the dealer, you go fix that. And then I got hooked. So after 2 years, I said, I want something nicer than this. Not only can I afford the $250, I was spending more than $250 on those repairs on the old car. That's what shocked me. I didn't realize how much money I was going to AutoZone and the auto parts stores and buying all these, $100 alternator and a $300 carburetor or a $150 radiator, whatever it was. It adds up real quick. I even had a leaking gas tank I had to fix. So I had to go to a junkyard and pull a gas tank out of a junked car. What a mess that is. Anyway, oh, and then the fuel gauge stopped working. So then I had to like reset my odometer every time I got gas. And when I hit 250 miles, I had to go get gas before I hit 300 or I'd be on an empty tank. So again, new car, none of these problems, everything works beautiful. And I said, well, $250 a month was easy. So after 2 months, I took the car back and got a nicer car, more decked out with power windows and automatic transmission and stereo and all the other stuff I didn't get on the first car. And it was only $50 more a month, but instead of 48 months, it was 60 months. And instead of having 24 months behind me with 24 to go, I start all over again at 0, Totally worth it. After 2 years of that, I said, I really need something I can enclose. These trucks aren't working. I was moving 21-inch CRTs. I can't have them sitting in the back of the truck in Phoenix to deliver a computer. As soon as I walk away from the truck, somebody in Phoenix is going to steal what's in the bed of the truck. So I needed an enclosed SUV that I could start putting the equipment in so I didn't leave it unsecured in the back of the truck. The other thing is people would use the back of my truck as a trash can. I would come out to the parking lot and somebody's garbage would be in the back of my truck. Empty soda cans, empty soda bottles, fast food bags. Apparently when you see the bed of a truck, you just throw your trash in it. That used to really upset me. So I traded that in 2 years later for the Chevy Blazer, which had the really dark tinted windows across the back of the car. So when I loaded this expensive computer equipment into it, you couldn't even see inside that there was stuff worth stealing in there. And then shortly after that, the flat screen monitors came out. And now moving a 21-inch monitor is no big deal. You could stick it behind the seat in a pickup truck. But I kept that Blazer for 19 years before I got rid of it. So I had paid it off again every time I traded a car in, I'd finance it for 60 months. I never go more than that because then, you're continuing to have full coverage insurance. You're out of warranty. You could have the car at the shop paying for the repair and having full coverage on it because the bank requires it for an additional 12 months. So I don't advise going beyond 60 months for that reason. The insurance company probably likes it. I'm sure the bank likes it. I'm sure the auto seller likes it. But after 60 months, that's 5 years. And consider I had the Blazer for 19 years. So I had 14 years of no car payments. That's pretty good. But I was really starting to have to put a lot of money into it. Everything was breaking. I was getting to a point where it was funny because when Mike put me in the Subaru, the SUV, the difference in the ride quality was everything started to squeak and rattle in the Blazer. It was a pretty rough ride, and I was just used to it. I didn't know any better. When Mike put me into the Subaru, it was like, oh my God, this car is smooth and quiet. I don't hear squeaks, I don't hear rattles, and everything works. And then the Blazer, everything was starting to fall apart after all those years. And so around the wheel goes. So I believe my philosophy is stop trying to race to the bottom. Get somewhere in the middle. Sacrifice a little more, tighten the belt a little more, because over the long term, it'll be worth it in frustration and in length of ownership, statistically speaking, right? I mean, other things can go wrong that we don't anticipate. But that's why I have the philosophy I've had, because of the struggles I had. I don't wish to go back and revisit those struggles. That's all. And if that comes across as me being a bit of a part snob, well, there's a reason. And it's for me, a very valid reason. Because in my eyes, a part snob is somebody who just wants the most expensive thing, regardless if they need it or not. And if it's not the most expensive thing, it's not good enough. That, from my perspective, that's a part snob. But I can understand somebody who's looking, look, I don't have a lot of money. I have to go to, no, you don't. You can save your money just like everybody else, and you can go without it a little bit longer. And I'm telling you, from experience, it's worth it. Borrow the money if you have to, if you're impatient and you won't wait. But don't buy a cheap computer, man. Just don't do it. It's not a novelty. This is something you're going to rely on. It's important. This is how you communicate with your family and your friends. It's how you pay bills. It's how you book airline tickets or Airbnb or vacations or maybe even get a job or work remotely. Why would something so important to you, would you go to the cheapest, most difficult, troublesome thing you could buy? It just doesn't add up. Not in my world, it doesn't. All right, back to some work here. So this, again, it's going to look exactly the same, except this panel is not glass. And no, you can't just put the glass on this one. You'd have to, there's some things you'd have to put in here to make that happen. So anyway, we're going to use a regular power supply in this build, not a modular power supply for the reasons I've already explained. All I want to do right now is I want to put that prepared motherboard into the case. We'll take a look at how this fits. We first have to start with putting the I/O shield in, and it looks like I just missed a contribution. I missed a couple. Let me give some shouts out here to these kind folks. We've got a contribution from Madi UL's contributed $2. David Starbuck has contributed $20. Hey, thank you, David. He says, Happy New Year. I'm building my third computer this week. Right now, I'm the tech guy for my friends and family. Love it. That's awesome. Eddie Tuig has contributed €20. He says, Carey, I just made a boot drive for Windows 10 thanks to your videos. At the end, I got a message to turn off Secure Boot when installing. Yeah. Go into the BIOS and turn off Secure Boot. You don't need it. He says, did I do anything wrong? By default, your BIOS may have had Secure Boot tuned on for some reason. I suggest disabling Secure Boot. You just go in the BIOS, you'll see it's an option called Secure Boot, and it says enabled or disabled. Flip it to disabled, save and exit. It's 2 minutes of your time. Mike C. has contributed $3. He says, here's a little help for a friend. Prosperous New Year. Thank you, Mike. Christoph Esch, watching us from Germany, has contributed €5. He says, Catherine has tipped me to a sister of this case, the Pure Base 600. It's a great thing. Please give some cookies for the boys. Oh, yeah, we should do that. Thanks, Christoph. Madi UL again contributed $2. And then most recently, a contribution just came in from Bill Bauer, contributed $5. Says, Happy New Year. Here's to a great year ahead. Thank you, Bill. Right on. Thanks to all of you again for supporting the channel. And yes, 2020 is going to be a very interesting year because I've got a lot of things that I'm going to experiment with, and I'm very curious as to how those experiments are going to turn out. So it's not going to be the same old thing. There's one thing I can't stand. It's the same old thing. I can endure it for a little bit. If I take the same route every day to go to a customer's location, I will intentionally take a different route, even if it's out of the way, because I can't stand to do the same thing. So in here, I've got the I/O shield here. Why do I have this in here? I mean, that's just the box it came in, isn't it? It's empty. Should be empty. Yeah, it's empty. So for some reason, usually I throw this box out. Maybe I've kept it so I know what I put in it. I get so busy I forget which computer has the Intel 660. But I could just turn it on and check it that way too. Now, the I/O shield, as I mentioned, they come in different qualities. This is kind of a cheapie, to be honest. It is a kind of a cheap I/O shield. And how do I define that? Well, actually, this one's better than most. This I/O shield, the grounding straps are going horizontally. That's a good thing. And some I/O shields on some motherboards, the grounding straps poke out this way. When you put your motherboard in and you're not paying attention, especially if it's down here, it can fold as you're putting the motherboard in. It could bend and then cover or block the hole that it's around, which means when you go to use that USB port, you can't plug anything into it because that grounding strap folded down. Then you got to take the whole motherboard out just to straighten that little piece of metal. So this I/O shield, what makes it cheap is it doesn't really have any foam backing on it. It's just a flimsy piece of aluminum. But for all intents and purposes, that's really all it needs to be. When they're thicker and have the foam pads on the back without these little grounding straps, they're a little easier to put the motherboard in. If you're a first-time builder, that can make a difference. If you're an experienced builder like me, it's just another day. I continue to see OBS picking up and dropping the connection here. So bear with me. I can see that the connection's dropping. Will this be the quietest PC? No, you can buy fanless power supplies and you can buy computers that don't run off any fans. The fans are where the noise is coming from. Anything that's mechanical, like a mechanical hard drive, that'll make noise. So when you get rid of all the fans, you go pure solid state, there's nothing to make any noise. You might hear some coil whine at the worst. But Wheelman Kentucky wants to know, does the Intel 660p use software like the Samsung? Yes, it does. You can type in Intel SSD Toolbox in Google, and you can see the software there. Yeah, so we're still suffering some dropped frames here. It's still wavering up and down, up and down. The only other thing it could be is YouTube, but I can't believe YouTube's having the issue without, a lot of people complaining about it. But yeah, it's dropping pretty bad. We've got about 3.7% of drop frames, which is still an improvement over what it was, but it doesn't appear that I've resolved the problem with the modem. It does appear that it's more of an ISP-related problem. Okay, so we should be back. Let me put the I/O shield in. I don't know if what I said earlier went out. And I can't remember what it was because it was 30 seconds ago. But that's how difficult that is. I see a lot of people struggle to get those in, and it's just something you learn through experience. It's really hard to explain it. You just want to make sure you get all the corners in. A lot of first-timers, they get one corner in, and then they go to the other corner, and then they get that one in, and that one pops out. So there's a way of spreading your hand and holding the top in place as you put in the bottom, or the other way around. And you learn how to do that from experience. Be patient with it, Don't get too easily frustrated with that. It's just something that, like playing a piano, the more you do it, the better you'll get. Don't expect to sit down at a piano and crank out Mozart you've never played before. It's not a realistic expectation. Likewise, when you've got to put your I/O shield in for the very first time, if you've never done it before, understand that this may take a little bit of time to figure out. It just pushes in. There's no tool required, but one side will pop out when you pop the other side in, and you got to think about it. It's like a little video game. So I'm going to lay the case flat, which doesn't give you guys much of a view. I apologize for that. But Mitch will be here to film upcoming builds, and so we're going to get those close-up shots that you guys like. And Mitch is a tall guy, so he can just hold the camera up like that, and you can see inside. But I've done this dozens, hundreds of times probably on this channel. So if you're really interested in what I'm about to do here from an inside view, I have plenty of other videos that demonstrate that. But I'll describe to you what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring the case, I'm going to bring the motherboard down to the case with the I/O ports facing out, and then I'm going to lower it, tilting the front of the board down. So I'm going to tilt it so that these ports here are going to line up in those holes. And again, if I had grounding straps, let me bring the camera down so you can see this better. If I had grounding straps, I would be very cautious of not bending them. And then once I get these ports all lined up, I'm going to push the motherboard towards the camera, towards the, pushing it this way. And the motherboard will seat down. See, these aren't lined up here. See how it's actually bowing the I/O shield out. I don't know how well you can see that. So I have to make some minor adjustments with the motherboard so that all of these ports are accessible through the holes. Then I can push the motherboard this way, and it should seat onto one of the standoffs that is it's like a little post. Yeah, you may even have just heard it. The motherboard just kind of went down a little bit. Now, it just so happens, and I always notice this after I do it, but this motherboard has a mounting hole in it that the case does not support. So I'm going to grab a little plastic standoff, so this has got to come back out. I always do this. You think I'd learn by now. The Corsair cases do not have support for two holes this close together. It just doesn't exist. I've never seen a case where that's supported. So there's this one hole here towards the end. There's no other hole that far out. See, this rest of this, usually the holes are all in a straight line from the top, the middle, and the bottom. And here on this Gigabyte motherboard, it's the one thing that really bothers me that Gigabyte does that. No other motherboard manufacturer that I'm aware of puts a hole there. Now you don't have to use it. It's fine to install this motherboard and leave that hole empty. But I have these little plastic standoffs, and since I've got them, I'll use them. And that'll just give that board a little extra support once it's put in the case. But it's entirely optional. You don't feel like you have to do it. Again, if I didn't have these things, I would probably go on Amazon and order them because I build so many computers. But if you're just building one for yourself and you leave that mounting hole empty, there's no negative or consequence for that. You'll be fine. So back in my office, I got a tray of these little plastic standoffs. The way we used to install motherboards in the 90s was like hanging a picture frame. Inside of the case, there would be these cutouts. Hold on, let me fix the camera. Inside of the case, instead of standoffs, you would just have like keyholes. It's like the hole is wide and then it gets narrow at the bottom. And then you'd put a bunch of these on the motherboard, and you would slide these in, and they would lock down into the little keyhole, like a picture frame. And then you'd use one or two screws with one or two brass standoffs to secure the motherboard to keep it from pulling away or moving up. In other words, because if it moved up, then potentially this little circle thing here would come out of its little holder. Look, it made a little impression on my hand. And then your motherboard would fall out. So we had at least one screw to hold the motherboard in. And then you'd be, 9 of these, and you'd have to get some needle nose pliers and squeeze the tip to get these out of the board. Oh, it was a good time. It was a really good time. So I had a lot of these because I used a lot of them. Now motherboards don't use them. So if I cut that little tip off of it, I end up with a little flat bottom. And that's the same distance in height as the standoffs that we use today, so that the board will rest on the back of the motherboard tray, and it'll prevent any warpage from occurring. Not that that would happen anyway. Like I say, those holes are so close together anyway. It doesn't make any sense to me why Gigabyte does that. And it's really kind of an OCD thing. I see a hole, and I want to fill it. So right here on the back of the board, this is the hole right here. So I'm just going to push that in from the back. And that's going to just give it a little support as it rests there on that. But as I mentioned, with this hole right beside it, it's not like there's enough leverage for the board to warp anyway. It's just really annoying. It shouldn't be there, Gigabyte. There's no point in it. Serves no purpose. I think Gigabyte makes cases, and I bet those cases have support for that extra hole. I don't know if anybody else's cases do. So again, I'm lining up the I/O ports here. Make sure that all the speaker ports are coming through the holes clearly, that we're clear all the way through here. Then I can push the board towards the back, and then it'll seat down onto the one standoff that's just a little post. And you may hear it. You did this last time. There it goes. Now that's going to hold the board into position for us so we can secure the board with the remaining standoffs. On some cases, you've got to put the standoffs in yourself, and you've got to be very careful. Only put standoffs where there are holes in the motherboard. Because what will happen, and I've seen this happen, people will put their motherboard in and not realize, because you can't see through the motherboard, you can't see what's behind it. And they won't realize they have a standoff back there that they didn't use, and it's grounding against something on the back of the board, short-circuiting it, and that can toast your whole computer. So something as simple as checking, count how many mounting holes you've got, count how many standoffs you've got. If that number's not the same, you got something extra there, or you need to put one in. I'm more worried about having a standoff that's hidden behind the board than I am about having a mounting hole that wasn't used. However, if you do it right, you'll use all the mounting holes, with that exception that I just showed you, because that's really unusual. And if you use a different size motherboard other than a standard ATX, like if this was micro ATX or mini ATX, we may have to move standoffs that were pre-installed from the manufacturer. But if we're using a regular ATX board, the standoffs pre-installed by Corsair, BeQuiet, those should already be in the right positions for you. And the key word in that sentence is should. You always have to check it. And what I'm looking for are the screws to mount the motherboard. So these screws have a little shoulder on them. They've got to be for the 3.5-inch hard drive installation. These screws are fine threaded screws. These have got to be for the 2.5-inch drive installation. And this little bag of screws, these are just standard hex head black screws, which apparently BeQuiet is using as the screws for the motherboard to be secured, and that's fine. Now, if I were building a computer for the first time, I would not be using an electric screwdriver. And if I were doing this for a living for 30 years, I would have carpal tunnel syndrome if I didn't use an electric screwdriver. I advise you, if you're new to building and you want to use an electric driver, use it only for taking screws out. Or at the very least, start all the screws by hand, get them all started, and then if you want to go and tighten them down. The problem is you can cross-thread, and if you cross-thread, there's almost no repair you can do. It's not a warranty issue. You're the one who screwed it up, and you'll just forever have a screw that'll never tighten because you were too lazy to turn a screwdriver, right? Now this screwdriver I'm using, this is a Milwaukee M4, and it's great for computer work. It's I've got a 6-inch number 2 Phillips bit on it, and it's got a clutch that'll turn off. It'll prevent the driver from turning, and you can adjust the clutch. I put it on 3, and so when I start, like right now, you can just hear me just getting the screws started. That's so I can move the motherboard around if necessary to get all the screws lined up properly. Once they're all started, which again I recommend you do by hand so you don't cross-thread anything by mistake, then you'll hear the screwdriver automatically shut off. I keep getting ahead of myself. What I've just realized before I can mount this motherboard is I'm going to have to put the power supply in and run the 8-pin power cable. Because this heatsink is so big and the case is so small, I mean, you might think it's a big case, but it's not a very tall case. There's no way for me to get my hand into the top to run that cable. And I could probably grab some forceps and do it that way, but this will be a lot easier if I change the order in which I'm installing, which is unique. Normally, it's a habit for me to put the motherboard in and put the power supply in later and run that cable secondary. But with this motherboard and this heatsink, how many times have I done that now? Like a dozen? I still haven't got it drilled into my head yet. And I don't even know what power supply I'm going to use for this build yet. I better figure that out now because I need to put that in first. I'm missing a screw somewhere. Where is it? It's not that one. It's not that one. It's not that one. Oh, I got them all. So if you're new here, what I'm talking about is way up here, there's a power connector, right up there. And if this big old heatsink wasn't in the way, I could easily access it. Now, there's two different ways I can do this. I could just take the heatsink off. Now, the Mugen 5, super easy to take it off, no big deal. I could have gone ahead and finished the motherboard install, remove the heatsink temporarily, put the 8-pin connector on and been done with it. My preference in the order of the build when it comes to these specific parts. Oop, forgot a screw. My preference is to go ahead and put the power supply in first, run that 8-pin power cable up the back of the case, and then plug it onto the motherboard, and then put the motherboard in. That, to me, makes more sense. If this was a taller case, maybe if we had the Pure Base 600, that would give me enough room to get my hand in there, maybe. I know on the 200R, there's no room for me to get my hand in there. That's why I should already have remembered this. And this is my first experience putting that motherboard with that heatsink into this case, and it's got the same issue as the 200R. And it obviously, if the case is short like this, you can presume that's going to be foreseeable. If we had a modular power supply, I could simply put the modular cable on and not have to put the power supply in yet, and then do it the opposite way. So there's 3 different ways I just told you you can conquer that. 4 ways if you want to grab some forceps and do it the hard way. Now for this build, I think I'm just going to use, what do I have to use here? I've got a 500 watt power supply, I got a 550, I got a 600. Depends if we're going to put a graphics card in it or not. If we're going to put discrete graphics in it, we want more than 500 watts. Well, I got an EVGA 1000 G2 back here. I have a 550 EVGA, a 600, and a 500. I think we'll go with the 550. Because 550 is good if they want to add a graphics card. And 550 is not overkill if they don't. 500 would probably be okay, but it's going to be not going to give us a lot of headroom. So this is the power supply I'm going to use. And I have to talk to the customer, but I'm going to use it for now, and if I have to change it, I'll change it. But I think that's going to be fine. And it's cheap. It's not a lot of money. Got a good warranty. A couple years anyway. Some EVGA power supplies have a 2-year, some have a 5-year, some have a 10-year. This is definitely not a 10-year power supply, but that generally comes with the price too. You know, when you're spending 120 or 150 bucks on your power supply, it's probably going to have a 7 or 10-year warranty. Yeah, I forgot EVGA has 7-year warranties too. So it depends on how much you spend. Let's take a quick look here in the chat. Looks like I missed a couple contributions, so I'll give a quick shout out to, I guess I didn't miss anything. Looks like I got everybody. We've got 1,117 people watching. Oh, there it is. Robert Fitzpatrick's contributed $2. Thank you, Robert. So, yeah, there is a grounding strap here. They're pointing it out in the chat room that the grounding strap bent down. So this is what I'm talking about. Let's see if I can get you a zoom in on this. I didn't see it. I thought it was there, and I wasn't seeing it. But that's the one that gets me every single time. If you look, where is it? Right here. See this? You may not be able to see it right now, but when I put the motherboard in, if that bends down, it blocks the hole. This has to be bent up and out of the way. And it's supposed to rest on top of the I/O shield. It's not supposed to sit in front of it. If it sits in front of it, then we can't get the plug in there, right? It'll be blocking it. And that's the only one on this I/O shield. All the other ones, they look like these. These will never get in the way because they're going the opposite direction. This is the only one that folds down. And that, on almost every one of these builds, that catches me. So you might even want to preempt that and just bend it up a bit. And you know what? Even if that piece is not touching the I/O shield below it, it's not critical. It's just it's a little grounding strap. And so any of these that are touching are going to create that ground. It's not like everything has to touch. Ideally, if you want to do it right, it will rest on top. But it's not critical. And thank you. That was Zero Core that was pointing that out in the chat room. Thank you for pointing that out. I didn't see it. So that board was coming out one way or the other. That was written in the stars, apparently. So your power supply comes with an instruction manual. Those are real useful. We should have some mounting screws right here that we'll use for the power supply. They're the same ones that came with the case, by the way. For this model of case from this manufacturer, just coincidentally, they're the same screws. You can use whatever screws came with your case. My preference is if whatever we're installing comes with its own screws, those are the screws I prefer to use, unless there's a color mismatch or something like that. The power cable, you're going to have one of those to turn a machine on. And then, of course, we've got the power supply. Again, it's a non-glorious workhorse of a power supply, EVGA. If I've had 100 EVGA power supplies, I've had 2 bad ones. And if I've had 10 Seasonic power supplies, I've had 3 bad ones. So you're not going to see me using Seasonic very often. And same on Corsair. Those Corsair 750Ms, I think I've installed 6 of them. And I think 3 or 4 out of the 6 have failed. Not right away, but they have not shown the longevity of EVGA. And Seasonic, the same problem. So I'm really liking EVGA because they're not charging me an arm and a leg for the power supplies. And they're proving to be very, very reliable. Now that's anecdotal. I don't know for a fact that one is more reliable than the other. Maybe I got some bad ones, or maybe the power, there were power delivery issues of the customer's locations that suffered from these problems. But I can tell you, I've seen at least 5 of those 750Ms from Corsair go bad. I think they were all 750s. And so that's why you see me use a lot more EVGA than Corsair. The 750s run great for a few years. Usually they don't die for a while. They'll be a few years. In this case, when Martin's was the most recent one, he had 10 months left on his 5-year warranty. So it lasted a good long time. But at the same time, I feel like if it was EVGA, it'd still be running today with issue without the inconvenience, you know? So based on my personal experience, I'm using EVGA as much as possible. Nothing's more insulting to me than paying top dollar for a Seasonic and having to suffer through a failure in or out of warranty. It's just not acceptable. So again, because we've got the shroud up here in the front and the shroud does not come off, the way we're going to put the power supply in is it's got this frame that comes off. And it's going to go right on top of the power supply. Just line it right up. And using the screws that came with the power supply, which I have right here, we'll lock this frame in around the power supply. Again, I just start the screws because I want to lock this down until I know everything's aligned properly. If it's not aligned properly, the screw won't go in. Not rocket science, folks. Now you can hear that driver automatically shut off when it hits its preset torque setting. And that's how I know I'm not going to over tighten the screws and strip them out or rip the heads off them. And I have ripped the heads off of screws before. Not exactly the best thing to boast about. I've had customers, they see that electric driver. Oh my God, don't use an electric driver on my computer. I'm like, I've been doing this for years. Trust me, it's fine. You're going to strip it out. You're going to over tighten it. I'm like, no, there's clutches these days. You don't have to worry about it. Those are the customers I go, here's the screwdriver, you do it. Now I can put this in just like this. Just feed it in from the back here. And I'll take this wire tie off and pull these cables apart so we have some room to work with. And then these thumb screws can get tightened back down once I align it properly. Now those screws I like to tighten down just a little bit more because they're a bit heavier, or the power supply is a bit heavier. The screws are relatively shallow, these screws here. But I also like to tighten these thumb screws down. Just because there's thumb screws doesn't mean you should only be finger tight on those. That's up to you. Because I'm building computers for customers who don't build computers, obviously that's why they're hiring me, they should not be unscrewing anything. They should be hiring me for that. So I tighten those down, both so they don't just come out on their own with vibration, and also so the customer has to get a tool. If the customer finds out they can't turn it with their finger, they'll probably give up and call me, which is what I want them to do. Wow, Molex connectors. Video card. Ah, this one's got to be for the motherboard right here. So that will go right up through there. Now the downside of doing it this way is when I lay the case flat, these cables are all going to be in the way. So I can temporarily just shove them all in here just to get them out of my face. So get in there. And now when I lay the case flat with this cable up through here, it won't be all wonky because the cables are, because it's laying on its own cables. All right, so we're going to do this now for a third time. And these are the kind of mistakes that happen when you get in a hurry. And it's understandable you're anxious. I got these parts, I can't wait to use them. But you really need to slow down and enjoy the build process. I've been building a long time, and I enjoy the build process. But there's this sort of pressure when you're on live video not to dilly-dally, keep things moving, at least keep the conversation flowing. And my mind's got to be in two places. It's got to be on the conversation that I'm having with you at the same time the work that I'm doing. I've got to pay attention to what I'm doing. So that's why I often screw up, is I'm not real good at having my brain thinking about two things at the same time. I have a hard enough time thinking of one thing at the same time, at any time. All right, so now I can get the motherboard placed in here, or at least get it started, so I have access to that plug, and I can plug it in right now. The cable's kind of short, but that's the way you want it. You don't want too much slack, or you're going to have to do something with that later. And I think what I'm going to do is just rest the board quite a distance away from the I/O shield. I'm a good 6 inches into the case, so that I can reach in here now with my hands and put this connector on. Now, if I end up talking to this customer and they say, yeah, you know what, I want a better power supply or a different power supply than that, I will probably just take the heatsink off, because it's really easier, honestly. With the Mugen 5, it's just 2 screws, comes right off. I won't have to reapply any thermal compound or anything, as long as I make sure I stay clear of it and don't touch it with my fingers or anything. And not that having to clean up the thermal compound and reapply it is the worst thing in the world either. I mean, it's really not a big deal if you have to. But I'm saying if you are careful, you shouldn't have to. See, even this is a bit difficult because I don't have a lot of slack on the cable. So normally when I'm building these, I leave the top of the heatsink off and put it on after I put the motherboard in. This has been a recent problem for me a lot lately because I've been so happy with the motherboard, the H370, and I'm so happy with the cooler. I just think they're a really good deal. And that combination requires me to take a different approach to how I build. I have to do it in a different order than I've created a habit and I'm trying to break it, and it's really, really hard to break it. I've been doing it for so long. And it's dark in here, I can't really see, and I'm trying to plug two connectors on right beside each other, and they both have to go in at the same time. And there's not a lot of slack on the cable, so I'm regretting not taking the heatsink off. Not that it's too late to do it now, but I've made up my mind. Now I'm going to see it through. We're so close. Yeah, you know what? I'm just going to take the heatsink off. If this was a 200R, the 200R gives me just a little bit more room. And again, because it's a live video, I've decided it'll be best for you guys to not sit there and watch me struggle with it. So we've got the power cable there and ready for us. Let me secure the board down, and then I can take the top of the heatsink off real quick, and we can get that secured and move on with the build. Now you'll hear I actually tighten the screws down on the motherboard. Sometimes I'll do that. Sometimes I'm like, I know I should start them all first in case I need to move the motherboard around. And other times I'm like, yeah, I just took it out and it was lined up perfect, so I think it's probably going to go back in perfect. And you'll know if you hear me turn the screwdriver, back the screws off. But we'll see. So far, so good. There's 3. I only have 2 more to go. The 2 that go to the top. We'll see if the top is aligned. Straight. There it goes. And then one more in this corner. Now this other corner I could wait till I pull the heatsink out because I've got to get between the heatsink and the top of the case. But with a long bit like that, there are some case designs where I can't get in. Now I'm going to use the screwdriver that came with the Mugen cooler, which is this really handy dandy magnetized Phillips number 2 driver that comes included with your $49 Mugen cooler. And I'm just going to remove 2 screws. I got to remove the fan. Got to take the fan off because one of the screws sits underneath the fan. So let me do that. And I'll just set the fan aside. I don't need to unplug it from the motherboard. Otherwise, I'll have to get forceps to get that plug back in it again. So let me just take the Mugen 5 off of here real quick. It just takes a moment. Like I said, it's just 2 screws. And you'll see a thermal compound. We only put it on the top of the CPU because the surface area on the bottom of the heatsink is so much larger, we'll never really know where to put it on the bottom of the heatsink. You don't want it across the whole bottom of it because it'll make a mess everywhere. So you only put your thermal compound on your CPU, and then that will automatically transfer to the right location on the heatsink once the heatsink's put in. But we want to keep that clear of any dust or debris or fingerprints, so we're going to just put this off to the side where we won't touch it. And as long as we don't touch it down on the motherboard or on the heatsink, we don't have to wipe it and reapply it. Now I can grab that cable and very easily, I have super easy access to plug that in. Both of those cables are now plugged in. And this rear case fan, sometimes there's a fan header. Yeah, it's all the way up at the top here. And I can grab that and plug that rear case fan in because the rear fan header on this motherboard is right beside that 8-pin power cord, which again is going to be very difficult to get to when I put the heatsink back. So ideally, this would be the right time for me to do the cable tie on that rear case fan. And so I think I will do that because I just have a wire tie on it now. Now putting on that rear case fan with forceps is really easy. I've gotten real good at that. But if I can just nip it in the bud right now, I much prefer to do that. I may need 2 of these. There's one, there's another one. There we go. And then once I do this and I get the heatsink back on, I'll flip it up and you can see what that looks like. And of course it's going to fire up. We can test it, but we already tested it on the motherboard box with a spare power supply. So I know we should be good to go. Unless I shorted something out. Like if there's a hidden standoff I didn't see, that could prevent us from starting. It could even cause damage to the board. But I've done enough of these builds to know that these reputable case manufacturers like BeQuiet have all the standoffs pre-installed for us on a standard ATX motherboard, and we don't have to move any of them. If you're a first-time builder, I suggest you check. Don't have faith, check it. So there's one nylon zip tie. I'm going to put another one on here just to make it look a little cleaner. Oh, I missed it. Gosh darn it, I'm going to take that one back off. Okay, there's the one. Now let me get my wire cutters and I got to put that other one back. I know you guys are just kind of looking at my back right now. Just hang in there for just a minute. And I'll show you what it looks like, and I can set it back down. Okay, this time I want to make sure I grab the whole cable, not just a piece of it. Zip tie the whole thing together. Like I said, this is a lot easier to do now with that heatsink out of our way. Okay, so just so you can see what I've got going on in here, that's the fan for the heatsink. I'm just leaving it, I'm holding onto it. It's attached to the board. There's the fan with the wire tying we just did, plugged in. That's that 8-pin way up there. It's kind of hard to see, it's dark in there. And it's really important when you work on your computer that you lay it flat, as you see me do here. I try to work on the case on the motherboard as much as possible with the case upright so you guys can watch. Sometimes it's not possible, it's not smart, and it makes my job a lot harder to work backwards or upside down. But I'm willing to do it if it means I can convey the information better. Other times I have someone like Mitch here who will hold a camera and he'll move the camera around me. today's not one of those days. But stick around if you're new here. And we do have those camera shots on other builds that are currently available, and certainly on other upcoming builds. I mentioned I've got the Xenos build getting close to being a project we're going to start here. Sort of waiting on a video card right now. I'm kind of getting some feedback. Looking at a 2080 Ti, and I want to make sure it's going to fit before I spend $1,200 on it. I've got some great close-up shots of how this cooler goes in and why I love this cooler so much. It's not only inexpensive, it's one of the easiest third-party coolers to install, and it works with more or less all the modern sockets out there. So AM4, AM3, Intel's 1150, 1151, 1155, 1156, 775, 2066, 2011. It works on pretty much everything but Threadripper. And it's cheap, and it's quiet, and it works really, really well. You'll see me just taking the top off was super, super easy. Try and do that with your Noctua, you know. So anyway, I'm going to put the fan back on it now. Again, they make this super easy. It just fits in a notch. And now, ta-da! There she is. And now we can reach back here and pull these cables back out. And I need that big 24-pin motherboard power cable if we're going to fire this bad boy up. And I like the cable management. I like the way BeQuiet sort of put this on an angle, because with most other cases, like the 200R, you just have holes here. So you see a lot more of the cable. With this sort of corner cutout, the amount of visible cable is significantly reduced. Now, again, there's no window for anybody to see inside, but that doesn't stop people. Sometimes somebody will order a computer from me, and the first thing they want to do is open it up and just look at how beautiful it is in there and admire it. Sometimes those people are me. They're like, that's a really nice computer. I'm like, you should see what it looks like when I take the side panel off. You think it looks good now? Look at this. That's the kind of work you should be doing. If you're building your own computer, you should look forward to showing off your workmanship. So if you're somebody that's just slapping it together and you don't care about your cable management, you're probably not going to want to show anybody what it looks like on the inside. Just pride is all that is. Just pride. Let me show you what I did. I'm proud of it. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that kind of pride. Pride in workmanship is something that's not very common anymore. Okay, and then like I said, that's going to hide that cable really, really well. If we come back around here, we can just route the cable. And then we've got the front port umbilical cables here. This is the power switch and power LED. I don't see a hard drive LED or a reset switch. There's a front case fan. I only hook up front case fans if we've got a discrete graphics card. So if we're not adding a graphics card, we don't need to hook up the front fan. You can if you want to. It's just something that's going to eventually make noise and the customer's going to call. My preference is to avoid that. Avoid unnecessary support calls. Avoidable. Drop my microphone. Hold on. I dropped my mic. I need my flashlight so I can see in there, and I need some glasses so I can read the little print. And we'll hook up that power LED. Again, I've got some great close-up shots of these little front port umbilicals. And me and Mitch and I did a video with beautiful close-up shots of this process. Now, I don't know why they removed the hard drive LED. I understand why there's no reset switch. People just don't use them anymore. But a hard drive LED is pretty important, and I forgot when I was talking about the benefits, the pros and cons of the BeQuiet Pure Base 500 that we're using here. It's definitely a con in my book to take away one of my abilities for the computer to communicate to me when the screen isn't necessarily communicating. So your computer may appear to be frozen, but maybe it's actually just busy processing something. How will you know if you don't have a hard drive activity LED? You won't. So I don't understand the removal of that. In theory, the power LED could almost be used as a hard drive LED, because clearly it's not going to light up and blink on and off if it's off, right? So I would have rather seen the power LED get removed, keep the hard drive LED. Please give me back my hard drive LED. With that, we can test it. That's just those two cables, just the 24 pin and that 8 pin were all we needed. And then of course we have to hook up the power switch. We don't even have to hook up the power LED. And that should be enough for us to turn it on. The rear case fan will come on. The front one I'm not hooking up unless I'm putting a discrete graphics card in. It's not needed. The front fan is going to pull air in. You see there's holes? People are like, well, how can that front fan breathe if this is solid? It's not solid. It can breathe just fine. It's on both sides. Switch off. I need a keyboard and mouse, which I have over here. That grounding strap is over a USB 3.1 port. So if that grounding strap I was mentioning earlier, if it had folded down, it wouldn't have blocked the Ethernet port, it would have blocked this USB port. What's the point of having it if you can't use it? So it's worth paying attention to when you put your motherboard in, that all of your ports back here aren't being blocked by any of the grounding straps on the I/O shield that potentially could be there. So keyboard's plugged in. I've got your monitor at home plugged in. There's 1,100 of you watching. I'm the only guy on the planet with 1,100 monitors hooked up to his computer. You don't believe me? Watch this. I'm going to put myself right up in here, right over here. And I'm going to reach over. Let's see, switch is on. We'll hit the power button. Power LED comes on. Fan's turning on the heatsink. Fan is turning on the case. We got our post screen. And we're in Windows 10. Just like that. Hunky-dory. This thing is dead quiet. So the fact that it's in a quiet case isn't really necessary on this build. Doesn't hurt anything either, though. There's no harm in it. And we've got both the fans back here moving in the same direction. We want that airflow being drawn in and being pushed out through where the I/O shield is. As I mentioned, your power supply down on the bottom is sucking air in from the bottom of the case, and then it's pushing it out through the back of the power supply. Nothing happening down here affects anything up here. So the air isn't shared between them as far as, it's not sealed off, don't get me wrong. The air is shared in that sense, but the power supply is cooling itself, and it's not doing anything for your motherboard. And your motherboard is cooling itself, it's not doing anything for your power supply. That's why at the bottom of many cases there's a little filter. If I reach under here, yeah, there's one under there. I think it comes out from the front on this case. It's a real long one. Yeah, and you've got this filter. And if you have one of these, do you know if you have one? You should check, because it's probably plugged up and you're suffocating your power supply. You are better off not using this if you never clean it. You're better off just take it off and throw it away, because at least then your power supply will still be able to breathe, even if it's coated in dust. If you have a screen and you don't clean it and it plugs up, you're going to suffocate your power supply, and you're better off not having it. So make a choice. Take this out once or twice a year and clean it, or remove it altogether. It's only for the fans that intake air. We don't filter air that's being exhausted. There's no point in that. All that's going to do is restrict the airflow. So that's our build. That's what it's going to look like inside the case. It's a tight fit in there, but it's also very clean looking. And the board colors match beautifully, even though that's not important. It's just a coincidence that it's a happy little accident, is what we'll call it. Thank you, Bob Ross, for happy little accident. And then we'll go full screen back on camera 1 again. And then finally, I'll answer any questions anybody has, and we're going to wrap up today's live stream. A couple other contributions came in. Let's take a look at, let's see what we've got here. Dustin Fuller contributed $5. He says, keep up the great teaching. Winston Angler, watching us from Vancouver, Canada, has contributed $5 Canadian. And Adam Sleeth has contributed 10 Australian dollars. Thanks, you guys, again, for contributing and supporting the channel. And I just want to look and see if anybody's got any final questions, technical questions for me. And otherwise, we're going to wrap it up. I'm about 7 minutes past my normal wrap-up time, so I'm running a little late. So if you've asked anything earlier, I haven't seen it, you'll have to ask it again. It's Dave Murray's birthday today. Hey, happy birthday, Dave. Nick Poverman said, nice video as always. Too bad we had a few trolls. I didn't see them, so it didn't bother me any. But that's why you guys are in blue. You're there to take care of that for me, and I appreciate, like I said, if somebody's being vulgar, you can hide them. Otherwise, you can just delete their messages, and they'll give up, you know. Justin Habu contributed $5. He says, I just started a music workstation build today. I'm waiting for the RAM and the Mugen 5 to show up. It's an i5 9600K with the Intel 660p M.2, 1 terabyte. He's got 2 of those, and 16 gigs of RAM. Sounds like a nice build, Justin. Oh, it's Dave Murray's birthday tomorrow, technically. He's 74. Wow. Well, happy birthday, Dave. Be one of the first ones to say that. Give Dave a happy birthday out there. If you guys are in the chat room, tell Dave happy birthday. Now, because I've removed the heatsink and put it back on, I will run Prime 95 on it again just to make sure it's sitting flat on there and make sure it's running like it was running before. Anytime you take the heatsink off and back on, you run that risk. Although, again, you're going to run the risk. You'd be more likely to run that risk of an issue if you're a newbie builder, you don't have a lot of experience. At the same time, while I'm less likely to do it, sometimes overconfidence is also just as bad as being a noob. So I have to be aware of that and double check my work to make sure that the overconfidence doesn't win. Dave says he's 20. My brain says I'm 20 and my body says I'm 74. I hear you, Dave. Carey, would you be tempted to use the AdLink S70 SSD in a business build? Yeah, I wouldn't use 10 of them, but I'd use one, and I'd let the customer know we're going to try something new here, so we're not going to put it in anything mission critical, and then if there's any problems, let me know. And after a certain period of time passes and I feel confident then I will use more of that company's products, because that product may not be available after the evaluation period, which may be a year or two. But I wouldn't run one company with multiples of an unproven, untested product, because the only one who's going to be inconvenienced by that financially is, well, me and the customer. But I'll be the one they're going to call. I'll be the one who's going to be made to look bad. And the customer has to agree to this before I do it, or I won't do it. I don't have a reason to leave Samsung or Intel to go to, was it AdLink? Is that what they're called? So I don't know what their support's like. But I'm curious, I'm genuinely curious. So I will use it for my own build, and I'll see how it works for me. And if it works well for me, then again, I'll offer it to a client with those conditions. Well, you're getting a lot of happy birthdays there, Dave. Luke says, Carey, I just put the usual $20 in your PayPal. Right on, Luke. Thank you. Again, as always, thank you for a great community and videos. Right on. Love it. Andy says, Carey, thank you so much for wishing me a happy birthday on Facebook. Well, you're welcome, Andy. We'll make you a moderator, too. What do you think about Enermax power supplies? I had a real bad experience with them, and they were very expensive, and I don't use them anymore because of that. Remember, when a part goes bad, it makes me look bad. That was years ago, too. So, Enermax may be different now, but I don't have any desire to leave EVGA, and I'll use Corsair and EVGA interchangeably. I'll even use Seasonic before I will use anybody else, period. Caleb Barker contributed $10. He says, with Corsair discontinuing their 200 line, what's going to be your next go-to case? I do believe that the discontinuation of the 200 line is a rumor. We've been talking about that over a year now, and it hasn't been discontinued. So at this point, I have no concern of replacing it. I am too busy to try and solve problems that don't exist. When and if the 200R becomes unavailable, then at that point, I will resolve it. You guys have been asking me this over a year. Over a year. Clearly, if that case was discontinued, it'd be gone by now. There's no way that case is discontinued, and there's so much inventory. No way. That case is not discontinued, and as far as I know, is not going to be. As of any announcement from Corsair, there is no announcement officially. If you have a link to an announcement from Corsair saying they're going to discontinue that case, please share it. If you don't, then you're just spreading rumors. So that's what I have to say about that. Newcomer 8771 has contributed $5. He says, cheers to 2020, Carey. Thanks, Newcomer. Cheers to you. Turns Garcia says, I'll send you a plane ticket to come to Guatemala and we'll drink San Miguel and I'll teach you about PC business. Yeah, if I'm not there, start without me. I've seen some pretty civil unrest in Guatemala. I don't know if it's recent, but it kind of makes me nervous. The whole that whole area makes me a little nervous. We can Skype and we can be there virtually. How about we do that? I'm not as young as I used to be, I'd say, if I was 25 years old, I'd say, give me the best you got. Bring it on. I'll go down a dark alley in the worst neighborhood. Bring it on. And I'm not suggesting all of Guatemala is like that. I'm an ignorant American. I only know what they show me on the news. So I don't know how true that is. Just how silent is that PC? Well, it's been running this whole time. Can you hear it? I'm leaning into it right now. It's running. In fact, I can hit the power button here and that will cycle it off. Hitting the power button and not holding it in, but pressing it and letting it go will cycle any Windows computer off no differently than going to the start button and hitting shutdown. It will shut down your applications and power it off. But you've got to push the button all the way down, Carey. You can't just, and it should shut right off. There it goes. And that's actually controlled in your control panel. You can tell the computer what to do if the power button's hit, to do a normal shutdown, to go into standby or hibernate, or to do nothing at all and ignore it once it's in Windows. What does holding the power button do? If your computer's locked up, like your mouse won't move, it's frozen, you don't have a reset button, like this computer doesn't have a reset button, or you've got a laptop, and same thing, it's kind of frozen. If you hold the power button down for about 10 seconds on any computer, laptop, tablet, phone, you hold the power button in for about 10 seconds and it will shut off. That's a way to force a shut off without physically unplugging it from the wall, which would also force a shut off. It's just a lot easier to hold a button down and to get down on your knees, get behind the computer and unplug it. Again, last opportunity. Any questions, any technical questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Any technical questions? Ron says, Carey, wishing you a very successful 2020. Thank you, Ron, and to you the same. Bandit Nev says, do you remember the days when you had to set the front LEDs to the computer speed? So back in the day, you'd have like these two calculator style LEDs that have a bunch of jumpers on the back. And you'd set two speeds. You'd set your turbo speed and your non-turbo speed. You'd have a turbo button on the front of the computer. And you'd move the jumpers to light up each segment of the LED to make the number you wanted. So you could say 88 if you wanted to. It didn't represent anything it wasn't tied into anything that mattered. It was just a light. But if you had a 286-12 that ran at 16 with the turbo button, you'd set it to 12 and you'd set it to 16 because that's what you had. But you could set it to anything. I forgot all about those days. You just reminded me of that, and I'd like to forget it again because it was stupid. You know how many jumpers there were to turn on each segment? The number 8. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 LED segments, and then there's 2 of those, so that's 14. And then you set it for turbo and non-turbo, so you double that to 28 different jumper positions for a light. DHR Street Speed says, how much to sponsor your channel? Well, that's going to be up for discussion. It's really hard to determine a channel's worth. What I was thinking of doing, if this potential studio works out, it may be like $1,000 a month. And if it's $1,000 a month, if I can get a sponsor to pay that for a year, a 12-month contract, then we'll call it the DHR Street Speed or whatever Studios. Hi, this is Carey coming to you from the DHR, and I can have a green screen behind me, and I can logo whatever the company, like I was thinking of Cronus or somebody, we put the logo behind me. And of course, if the company that sponsors a studio ever wants to use the studio, then I'll be there to operate the cameras and do whatever they want to do to assist them in that. So because technically it's their studio, and I would be broadcasting from that. So ultimately, at a bare minimum, I need the studio paid for. It would be nice if I had something on top of that too, but I'm not going to, beggars can't be choosers. I'm not going to say, well, it's $1,000 a month for the studio, plus I want $500 a month. I might price myself out of a sponsor. But I also don't want to price myself too low and be taken advantage of. But I'd be so happy to have a studio take advantage of me. I haven't even found a potential studio. I mean, there is a potential studio, but I won't be able to look at it until after the 4th of January. So maybe next week sometime I can schedule some time in the afternoon to drive downtown in Phoenix and evaluate if the studio will possibly work. If it possibly works, then I need to sort of test drive it. I need to make sure I'm not signing a 1-year contract and find out in the first 2 weeks it isn't going to work, and now I'm stuck with a bill for a place I can't use. So I have a ton of questions, what their bandwidth is am I going to have 24-hour access? Is it going to be secured when I'm away because I have expensive camera equipment that's going to be locked up? Is it quiet enough to film in? Do I have enough light? Will there be enough room? How much is it? And can I just do a contract with month to month in the beginning to see if it's going to work out? And then we can talk about a lease. So those are the questions I have ahead of me for any potential studio that I'm looking at. And so there's an organization that's been in the news for their over-evaluation, which is called WeWork. And WeWork has some cooperative offices. Basically, it's a big co-op. And they're still in business. They were just way over-evaluated. They had a very irresponsible, young CEO. Now they're coming down to earth with a more accurate evaluation. And they're not alone. They're not the only one in that space. But a cooperative or a co-op office space is ultimately what I'm looking for, because having other people around means my equipment's never left alone, and that means security won't be an issue. But I don't know if that means I get 24-hour access or if I only get access for the hours of the co-op. I don't know how noisy it is in there. And they say they've got 500 up on their internet. But if there's somebody else doing what I'm doing or something bandwidth intensive, will there be enough for me to do what I want to do? A lot of questions. So if that works out and that's going to be my potential studio, then I really need to find a sponsor to help cover the cost of it, at the very least. Thank you for asking that question, though. CJ Gonzalez says, Q&A about acquiring new business customers. We do that at Tech Vets. If you listen to the podcast at tech-vets.com, we've got about 150 shows thereabouts of just talking about stuff like that, running the business. The YouTube channel's more about, I share some of the business because I have to explain what my mentality is, why I do the things I do. That's because I'm running a business. I'm not just a guy sitting at home looking for something to do as a hobby. So the business comes up a lot, but I try to focus primarily on the education and the fun of building a machine, and encourage people to build your own and do it with your family, do it with kids. It's a great bonding experience. And thank you for the contribution and your question. Robert Foyles contributed $2. Brendan Ludy contributed £2. Thanks you guys again for your support of the channel. Any brand of memory to avoid with Ryzen 9 builds? I don't know. If you want to be sure of the memory, look at the QVL list from the motherboard manufacturer. Go to their website, download the latest quality vendor list or QVL list, and buy memory that's been tested. Because the memory has not been on the list means it hasn't been tested, so you don't know. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. If it's not on the list, it doesn't mean it won't work. But if it is on the list, it means it will. So if that's important to you and you don't want to risk it, it varies from motherboard to motherboard. It does not have anything to do with the CPU. It has to do with the motherboard compatibility. So check your motherboard manufacturer. Go to the support of whatever motherboard you're thinking of buying. And the other thing you can do is look at the reviews of the motherboard, and inevitably, like on Amazon or Newegg, people will spell out what RAM they used and what CPU they used, and they'll say how well it worked, and you can repeat what they did and reasonably expect the same results. Carey, do you still put the badges on your builds? No, I put them in the box and let the customer decide if they want to stick it on. And I ran out, so I haven't, the last 4 or 5 builds, I've ran out of the handcrafted by Carey. I still have the inspired by ones, but when I build, it's handcrafted by with my name and signature on it. I have to order more of those. I ran out. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. And I didn't want to do it during the holidays because everybody's busy and the shipping is crazy. And I forgot, so I'm glad you reminded me. I need to reach out to the guy I have do that. Hopefully he's still in business. Can a hacker cause your computer to repeatedly go to a black screen and have a program manager in the background? Usually, if somebody hacks your computer, they're doing it to make money. They're not doing it to irritate you. So it seems unlikely. It's possible, but highly unlikely. If something pops up that says, give me some money and I'll free your computer up from black screens, then yeah. But otherwise, I think you're just having a computer problem or a software problem, a hardware or software problem. DHR Street Street says, I'm interested in becoming a sponsor. Please stay in touch. Well, of course. Would love to have you as a sponsor. We'll talk about it. We'll definitely have to talk about that. ARGB or RGB, what do you recommend? Well, what you're seeing on the build I just did was all ARGB. I don't think there's a right or wrong there. Just pick what's in their price range and meet your expectations or your wants. John Wilson says, great stream as always. Well, again, and a big thank you to John for his contribution earlier today. It was very generous, and I appreciate it very much. Do you connect the exhaust fan above the stove to your PC? Only when I'm making bacon. Carey, what is the name of that company that teaches about tech business? That's called TechNibble. You go to technibble.com and it's all about the PC business. They're in Australia. They're based in Australia. Bryce Whitty runs that site, and Bryce is not just a web host. He has his own tech business. So he's talking to you from the trenches, and he's got real good, real life experience that he's sharing with you with regards to policies and procedures and why they exist and why you should consider them if you are not already in your PC repair business. And even talks about where most PC repair businesses fall short, or what we call MSPs, managed service providers. If you're interested in running a PC repair business, definitely check out TechNibble. They've got a whole business kit with contracts already written up, invoicing, all sorts of documents that you're not supposed to just use the documents right out of the package. You're supposed to modify them to meet the laws and the requirements of your local area. But at least you're not starting with nothing. You can take something that already exists and just tweak it to meet the law requirements and your personal, perhaps you have some rules you want to apply for whatever reason. And it's easier to modify something that pre-exists than to create something from nothing and then learn the hard way that you left out something vitally important, or you phrased something incorrectly that's open to interpretation. That can be a very expensive lesson. If you want to check your computer, there's a link posted by Dave Murray. Thank you for posting that, Dave, for the MC Soft Emergency Kit. Sometimes getting the emergency kit off requires a little tool called MC Clean, and it's because it's installing a service. It doesn't install a program, it's just a portable program, but it installs a service that's required to remove some threats. They can't be removed any other way. And then in order to delete the directory, you have to stop that service, and people go, oh, I thought you said it doesn't install. It's not an install. I mean, technically it installed a service, but it's not like it's going to be an add remove programs or, in apps in your control panel. So just Google MC Clean and MC Clean will shut that service down and allow you to delete the directory. It takes 2 seconds. It's really no big deal. But if your computer is coming up clean with MCSoft, then you don't have a hacker. Unless you've installed LogMeIn or TeamViewer or some other remote access program and given them access to it, in which case remove those remote access programs until you need them. Speaking of computer cases, the 780T, that white case I've been on that repair, some people were asking about it, and I said it wasn't made anymore. Apparently that is still made. You can buy it directly from Corsair for about $180. The owner of that case told me, he said, I don't know why some seller on Amazon has it for $480. It doesn't make sense. Tell your audience that they can go straight to Corsair and buy that 780T. It's still available. It's $180. A lot of people, when they shop, it never occurs to them to go straight to the manufacturer. I was looking for an EVGA power supply today, and it was not available on Amazon. So guess where I went? I went to evga.com, and EVGA sells their own power supplies. In this instance, they were out of stock. But it's worth looking at. So consider that when you're looking for a product, and maybe you typically go to a particular retailer and it's not available there, go to the manufacturer. Quite often, the manufacturer has a little part of their website where they do their own sales. Okay, I think I've addressed all the questions. What is my opinion on the BeQuiet Straight Power 11 power supply? Is it good quality? I think the power supply is a good quality power supply. I just don't like the vertical plugs because it blocks access to the biggest plug, the motherboard plug, sits at the front and it blocks access to everything behind it. I don't like that. I like pretty much every other modular power supply I've ever used where the plugs go in horizontally. So it allows access, easy access to get in and change things. That's my only complaint. Other than that, I like it. But that's a pretty difficult thing to get over when you have a case like this that has a shroud over it and you can't get to those back ports that are being blocked. If it was any other case that didn't have the shroud like a 200R, it probably wouldn't be as big of a deal. So I don't think the Straight Power 11 pairs well with the Pure Base 500. There's probably some other BeQuiet cases that it works better in, specifically ones where the shroud is either it doesn't exist or it comes off. As I said, this shroud is riveted in. You can see the rivets back here. The shroud does not come out. So on other BeQuiet cases, it does. James says, you said earlier you've built PCs for 30 years. Is it easy now compared to then? Oh, it's far easier, far easier. We used to have to plug in individual RAM chips and optionally one for parity. So there'd be 8 chips you'd have to push down into a socket, being careful not to bend the legs up underneath of them. You may have 4 rows of 8 with an additional 9th on each row for a total of 9, 18, 27, 36 chips just for the RAM. Then you had to add your video card, you had to add your sound card. Back then, nobody had networks, but you put a modem in. The big hard drives, they're about yay big. They took up 2 bays in the front of the case. The same little screws held them in too. They're heavy, Very expensive. Power supplies were this big, and they had a mechanical switch on the front. The AT style is what they were called. The case itself was made out of steel, not out of aluminum, and it stood nearly 3 feet tall. The case empty weighed about 30 pounds. So I used to have to pick up the case and put it on my pocket, on my hip, and carry it out with the weight on my hip, and I used to tear the top of the pockets and on my pants would, through that wear and tear, it would just wear a hole into the side of on my Levi's. I'd get holes about yay wide right over my top pocket on my right side. Because the only way I could lift it, I had to take the weight off of it somehow, and I put it on my hip. And then the whole top of it would come off, not just a panel. You took out a series of screws from each side of it, and then you pulled it like this, and you lifted it up. And the sheet metal was in the shape of a letter U. It was very heavy, and it was difficult to find a place to put it because it was awkward and large and heavy. So by today's standards, everything's built onto the motherboard. We don't put sound cards in anymore. We don't have to put network cards in anymore. We don't have to put video cards in anymore. RAM is already seated onto the memory module. That's what MM stands for on SIM or DIM, single inline memory module or dual inline memory module. These memory modules put all those 8 or 9 chips onto this one little stick, and now you just plug the stick in rather than plugging all 8 or 9 chips in. CPUs, you used to have to push those in with your hand with force. That's why these sockets are called zero insertion force or ZIF sockets, because now you don't have to do that. I have a specialty tool from Intel because in order to get a CPU out of its socket, it's only sitting in there because you forced it in there. There was no levers. You just shoved it in there, and you hope you didn't bend a pin in the process. And that's the way your memory went in too. And so I have a little metal rake. It's about this big, and the rake goes between the pins underneath the CPU, and you pull back on it, and it'll lift the CPU up. And then you go to the other side, and you lift that side, and then you go to this side, and you lift that, and eventually you kind of wiggle it out. And that was the days of the 386, 486, and I did a lot of 486 builds. I don't know. I built several thousand 486 computers back in the day, and I used the heck out of that tool. I even have a custom screwdriver that the company modified. Their engineer, I'm going to use the word engineer loosely, was this old guy, old guy. He constantly had a cigarette in his mouth, wrinkles top to bottom. He's been around a while. And what he did is he took a small straight edge screwdriver with a torch and he bent it because he didn't have one of those Intel official rake tools, CPU removal tools. And that was the tool they were using at the company when I started working there, was a screwdriver that was all burned because he torched it to get it to bend, and then you'd get that underneath the CPU, and you had to be careful because those CPUs were ceramic, and you'd crack them in half. If you put too much force on one side, you'd have to very gently work your way around it and wiggle it out. So things are far, far easier. We certainly didn't have the cooling issues back then, although we didn't have the cooling options. We didn't have liquid cooling as an option. And we also didn't have RGB as an option, thank goodness. If you wanted a case window, you had to get a hacksaw and make it yourself. Good days, good times. It's a lot easier today. So does the case have USB-C up front? No, it's got 2 USB 3.0s up front, but not USB-C. You still need to use cooling paste on the CPU. If your cooler, most coolers brand new from the manufacturer or like an all-in-one manufacturer, typically already have it pre-applied on the bottom of the heatsink. But if it's not pre-applied, then you'll have to apply it. Patrick Manny reminds me we also had dip switches. Yeah, that's true. We had dip switches we had to deal with, but those weren't too terrible. SATX Rail Fanning Productions contributes $2. How do you change the default install directory? You don't. The minute you start changing default install directories is the minute you become one of the people who says, this Windows update caused me a problem and it's Windows update. Leave those install directories alone. The only time you should be changing it, let's say you're installing a game, it's like a couple hundred gigs and you don't want it on your C drive. During the install, the program will ask you, where do you want it to install? If the program doesn't offer that to you, then it's not an option. And there, because it's a computer, you can brute force it, and you open a whole world of pain up when you do that. You might get it to work, and you might be happy and think you beat that beast. But weeks or months later, it'll come back to haunt you. And your only solution may be a full reinstall and starting over again. So if you want to go down that path, you can go down it without me. I highly advise you to not change install directories unless it's an option during the install. Garth says the PureBase 500 seems to have better standard equipment than the 200R, especially the 140 millimeter fans and the added space behind the motherboard tray. Yeah, and the shroud that hides all the cabling. That's a nice benefit as well. Just not with a modular power supply, because that shroud does not come off. So there's pros and cons to everything. So they're certainly not identical. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks, you guys, for the questions. I appreciate everybody tuning in, all the contributions today. A shout out to everybody who's contributed. And that includes Sadex Rail Fanning Productions, CJ Gonzalez, Brendan Looney, Robert H. Foyles, Newcomer 8771, Caleb Barker, Justin Havu, Adam Sleeth, Winston Anglu, Dustin Fuller, Robert Fitzpatrick, Bill Bauer, Madi Yoel, hey Madi, Christoph Esch, Mike C., Eddie Tuig, David Starbuck, Madi again, Brendan Looney again, George, J-O-R-J, Irving T., Ed Schwartz, Madi Yoel again, James Zender, Tony Wello, Hugh Wong, Jesse Kirk, and of course again to John Wilson for a very generous contribution earlier today to support the channel. Thanks to all of you, all my friends in blue, thanks for keeping it civil in there today. And I will see you all again very, very soon. Until then, bye for now.